I call the Committee of the Whole meeting for November 16th, 2020 to order. I'd ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Ms. Wu?
Here.
Ms. Hersey?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Holbrook?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mayor Marlin?
Present.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Phyllis.
You're welcome.
We have to now approve the minutes of our previous meeting from October 19th, 2020. Would there be a motion to approve the minutes, or are there any changes to the minutes before we do that?
I'll move approval of the minutes.
All right. Okay,
I'll
that's
second.
Who would like to second again?
I'll second.
Okay, Jared Miller. Okay, thank you. Were there corrections to the minutes? Anybody have any corrections? Okay, I don't see any. Those in favor indicate by saying aye.
I think we have to do a roll call.
Oh yeah, that's right, we do. Thank you. So, City Clerk, please call the roll for us.
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Okay, those are approved minutes. Are there additions to the agenda?
I have none. Carol,
Yeah.
do we have any?
No.
Okay.
No, okay. All right, so that leads us to presentations and public input. I don't see that we have a presentation this evening. Well, we do. It's going to be later in the program, as indicated on the agenda as number 11. So if that's appropriate for everybody, we'll just go on to opening up public input. So I have a statement to read concerning how public input is to be proceed for city council meetings and using Zoom as the media. The city takes public comment via email, written format, and verbally. On October 12th, 2020, the Urbana City Council approved new rules for public input during remote electronic meetings. These rules are listed on each agenda for the city-sponsored public meetings. Members of the public may join meetings as either a Zoom webinar or a telephone participant to make the verbal input. This is a time for the committee members to listen to the public. Discussion, debate, or commentary will not take place during this period. Public comments are limited to 4 minutes per person. And public input will total no more than 1 hour unless shortened or extended by a majority vote of the members present. The meeting chair has the option of giving priority to speakers who wish to comment on specific agenda items upon which a vote will be taken. A person may speak once during the meeting and not cede time to another person. We ask that you address your comments to the public body as a whole and maintain respect for the process and respect for the members of the city council, city staff, and the general public. The meeting chair member or the public body has the authority to call a speaker out of order for using abusive, harassing, or threatening or defamatory remarks. If the speaker refuses to cease the remarks, the meeting chair may mute the speaker's microphone and ask that the speaker please send the remainder of their remarks via email for inclusion in the meeting records. So thank you all the citizens of Urbana for helping us conduct respectful and productive meetings. As a Zoom webinar participant, you may wish to speak during public input. What you do is to click the raise your hand button. which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, and wait to be called upon by the presiding officer. Please state your first and last name for the meeting's record. For those who are speaking to us by telephone, to raise your hand, you may do so by pressing *9 once, and you will be called upon by the host or the presiding officer. Please state your name, first name and last name for the meeting record. Public comments must be sent prior to the closing of the meeting record at the time of the adjournment, unless otherwise noted, to the following email address: citycouncil@urbanaillinois.us. The subject line of the email must include the words public input and the meeting date. November 16th is today's date. Emailed public comments labeled as such will be incorporated into the public record. Copies of emails will be posted after the meeting minutes have been approved, and those will help you guide yourself as you do public input with us. So I'd like to see then who are individuals who would like to do public input. I see we have 5 individuals. And in order that I see them, we'll start. I invite Tracy Gloss to please provide public input.
Hi, good evening. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Good evening. My name is Stacy Gloss, and I am the chair of the Urbana Sustainability Advisory Commission. My comment this evening is to express my support and enthusiasm to the city for the Lumpkin Family Foundation grant for street trees in Urbana, which will be accepted this evening. The Sustainability Advisory Commission is excited to support the Sustainability and Resilience Office's efforts on this grant. This is a wonderful contribution toward building healthy and sustainable communities through employing ecosystem services such as tree planting to reduce heat island effects in areas with fewer trees. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much also. All right. The next individual would be Dottie Burrow-Weiss. Dottie? Do you wish to speak?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, you can. We can.
Okay. My name is Dottie Burrow-Weiss, and I've been a resident of Urbana for about 7 years. I'm a member of the Urbana-Champaign Friends meeting, which meets in Urbana on East Main Street. And in September, we approved a statement on police violence that I'd like to read. And I believe that you've already received copies, but I wanted to read it in addition. And it has relevance to a couple of the issues that are being dealt with this evening and this week. We recognize that the role of the police can be challenging. Even when they deal with difficult situations, they're expected to show respect to every community member in every interaction and to treat each individual equally, regardless of race or age or gender or economic status. We were distressed by the recent violent arrest of a young Black woman by Urbana police officers and by other episodes of violence by police against community members, disproportionately against people of color, similar to what has been occurring across our nation. These actions cause both physical injury and emotional trauma to the victims, their families, the community, and even the police themselves. We understand that this is not just a problem of individuals, but that some of our systems accept and may even encourage this violence and racism, which causes moral injury to those who carry it out, as well as the injury to the victims. As Friends or Quakers, we believe that every person has that of God within them, some of the divine spirit of goodness and love. We believe that all people should be treated with respect and care. This leads to our commitment to using nonviolent methods to resolve conflicts when they arise, as we do not want to harm others either physically or emotionally. These beliefs also require us to examine our own behavior as individuals and as a group, and to speak out when we see injustice, violence, and oppression in the public realm. We must address systemic racism within ourselves as well as in our social, religious, and economic institutions and in our civil society. We stand in solidarity with those who march and protest against the police violence that disproportionately affects Black and Brown communities, and against the complacency of the people in our community who don't object. We're called to hold up the value of each of the people who are suffering from this violence and to work to change the systems that perpetuate racism and violence. In keeping with our values, we encourage city and county officials to take the following steps. Number one, increase police training and de-escalation techniques and include follow-up sessions where body cam and dashboard cam videos are reviewed with officers to discuss what was done well and possible alternatives for each situation that would have better outcomes. Two, strengthen civilian police review boards in the county and municipalities by ensuring they have access to all complaints and have subpoena power in order to improve performance and also to give community members faith in the system. Three, develop community forums and other measures to establish effective two-way communication. Four, increase social services in the community to address issues such as homelessness, substance addiction, mental illness, and domestic violence. Five, in addition to having community-based preventive services, strengthen linkages and collaboration between law enforcement and behavioral health programs. The two issues that this relates to would be the use of force policy and also the traffic stop data and the importance of continuing it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dottie. All right, the next individual is Tracy Chong. Would you like to speak?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hi, I'm Tracy Chong from Urbana. I'm going to start tonight with a question. Can we trust the Urbana Police Department under Chief Seraphin's leadership, even with the proposed policy changes? Last Thursday, during the use of force listening session, after months of denying any misconduct, Brian Seraphin admitted that Officer Eric Ruff's handling of his rifle was a violation of policy during the Aaliyah Lewis arrest. The public had been right all along, but this admission only happened after a concerned resident took their time to actually look at the evidence presented, something that UPD failed to do. Even then, it took prodding from residents week after week before Seraphin finally decided to say something. Seraphin should immediately issue a formal press release acknowledging the misconduct, acknowledging the failures of UPD's own internal investigation, how this failure came to be, and how the changes proposed ensure that this failure does not ever happen again. Mayor Marlin used $20,000 of taxpayer dollars for an external review that was also a failure. Hillard Hines gave the thumbs up to UPD's review, which the public knew was flawed. Mayor Marlin needs to address the fact that up to today, there has been no meaningful review, I repeat, no meaningful review performed for the Aaliyah Lewis arrest. Seeing that the public trust in the police department is so broken at this time, I find it astounding that we are once again trying to lessen civilian police oversight. Carol Mitten's latest actions regarding the Civilian Police Review Board have been the opposite of transparent. Why did Carol Mitten give a presentation to City Council without consulting CPRB members on its contents? Carol Mitten made some rather bold claims about the complaints and appeals, costing $42,000 and $122,000. Carol Mitten then proceeded to say, quote unquote, "We do not track the number of hours that we spend." Gosh, if I were to claim in public that something cost $100,000 like what Carol Mitten did, I had better bring my receipts. Regarding Carol Mitten's CPRB presentation on October 26, I'm still curious why Mayor Marlin told the public that the scheduled appeal hearing was cancelled due to the appellant and CPRB members having scheduling problems. Did Carol Mitten lie to Mayor Marlin about the actual reason? Did Carol Mitten try to cover up the reason that the hearing was cancelled was
Chairman?
because Mitten herself did not follow procedures
I think she's out of
mandated
order.
by CPRB ordinance?
All right,
It is concerning
Tracy,
that Carol Mitten
could you
believes.
please be sure to be more respectful? All right, well,
I wish
all
to
right.
continue. It's concerning that
You-
Carol Mitten believes she's exempt from the procedures mandated by CPRB ordinance. At the same time, Carol Mitten is urging City Council to amend the ordinance so that procedural or administrative complaints will be excluded from the CPRB complaints and appeals process. From Carol Mitten's proposed changes to the CPRB, it was clear that her main goal was to make sure certain types of complaints were ineligible to go through the appeals process. This is a terrible move
Let's
by
try not to be too opinionated and try to stick to facts, please.
I think these are facts. Sorry, you really interrupted me. I think this is a terrible move by Carol Mitten that would lessen civilian oversight
Mr.
on
Chair,
some of the
these are
categories.
opinions. These are opinions. They're
Yeah,
not
they are.
facts.
Okay, of course, the public can express opinions, and we are doing better. Thank you, Tracy. You're doing a little bit better. I think we appreciate your civility. Perhaps the content's not exactly perfect, but thank you for trying. All right, the next person up is Mr. B. Dunn 545425 Gmail. Maybe you could express your name, and we open your public opinion or public comments.
Hey, my name's Brian Dunn. I'm from Champaign. And yeah, I just brought my dog in from outside, and it's really cold outside, you know, which is kind of an opinion, but something I think I could state here. And it gets me thinking that I hope that our community is doing everything possible to keep people in warm houses with running water. And if there is any ability that any motion you can make would either influence or cause that to be a certainty, that would be amazing, because as someone who is immunocompromised, I can't imagine the terror I would feel being uncertain of those conditions going into these winter months, knowing that to seek shelter with someone else or in a group setting would put me at great risk as our numbers creep up to, you know, close to 10%. Those are not good odds. And, you know, sorry if these are opinions. I'm not really sure after that last comment what I'm supposed to be doing here, but I just hope to express to you that it is imperative that you do everything possible to take care of your community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dunn. All right, the next individual with the raised hand is Bo Barber. Bo?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. Last time I talked about Noimer and shutoffs and the number of disconnections in September, which occurred over the period of 1 week. Urbana had 47 disconnections by Ameren. We have an update now for the data from October, and there were, for Urbana only, there was 227 disconnections by Ameren, Illinois. In addition to this, there were 83 disconnections by American Water in Urbana alone. This is getting worse, and I'm working with CUPHD and Cunningham Township via Daniel Chenoweth as best as I can, but this is just an endless tide of disconnections that are going to be occurring. And I've worked with them to try and reach out to people and figure out, you know, get in contact with people, try and point them to the right direction so they can get the financial aid they need, talk to Ameren to get something set up. Ameren purposely sends us notices, notifies CUPHD, notifies them basically less than 24 hours in advance of when they're going to potentially disconnect services for people. And out of just from November 1st to November 16th, today, Urbana has received 181 disconnection notices, and every other day I get more. They switch between Urbana one day and Champaign the next, and I'm exhausted, and I'm not sure how much I can keep going fighting this losing battle. And coming up in December, that winter moratorium that I used to even think was going to be an end-all be-all is not an end-all be-all. It's a means-tested thing like we currently have now. What we have here is a means-tested program with Ameren still shutting people off. They shut off 227 people. It's a means-tested program, and it is actually, the winter moratorium has weaker protections. This is not going to be solved by the governor. It's not going to be solved by the winter moratorium. It's going to come down to the local governments, and that's why I'm pleading with you. You have the power to act. You passed the resolution promising that you would act, and I understand there's things you can, to settle out, but we don't have time. That's not a luxury. I've worked with organizers. People have found homes abandoned because they've lost their water and they've lost their power. And I know that because these people have gone to houses that they know people lived in. There was stuff still in the front yard, and these people went by these places over the course of 3 different days, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, and no one was there. They went different hours of the day. Those people were gone. And it's going to get worse as people abandon their homes to find shelter elsewhere during a pandemic that spreads like a wildfire. And so I know you've received an email today that explained what you can do. You can act on this immediately, and you can, whether for whatever period of time that you can do it, you have to do it. I'm begging you, because people are going to die because of this. And I can only do so much with the organizers that I'm working with. Daniel Chenoweth can only do so much. And we're trying, but you need to act, and you need to act now, because this is going to get bad, and it's already bad, and it's going to get worse. Thank you for letting me comment.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I do believe we are going to address something about that eventually here, and we hope to share that with you. There is also, I want to just comment that the city offers a list of immediate assistance resources on the city website for Urbana rental, mortgage, and utility assistance through the township and through different organizations in the community. And I encourage anybody who has an issue with their services to please use those resources if they are able to. All right, Grace Wilkin, your turn to speak for public input. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Grace Wilkin. I'm an Urbana resident, and I want to talk about the discussion item today. And this report shows that, we have some blatant racial discrepancies in our police and policing, and that these are deep issues that need to be addressed. I'm concerned about the pilot program. It seems really vague. Sounds like officers can arrest or do traffic stops for any reason within this area and also outside of this area. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I think that it's not meaningfully addressing the deeper issues of how we support our communities and how we deal with racial issues and police accountability. And there are a lot of deep issues here that go along with traffic safety and community safety. I also want to talk about item 7, this grant for tree research and tree planting. I think that's a great thing and really important to do. And that's great that our city staff was able to get that grant through and accepted from the foundation. And I'm also wondering if the combined almost $10,000 additional pay to city staff from the city is necessary. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but just a question I wanted to ask, if that's within the scope of their full-time job already or not. Just something to think about with the pandemic and economic hardships. And then another item I want to talk about was continuing to work on preventing utility shutoffs, whether that's pressuring state and county governments, the utility companies directly, making emergency orders, whatever needs to be done to try and keep people safe and as housed as possible. That's all for tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Grace. Next up, we have Ellen Axelrod. Ellen?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Could you put up the clock, please? Thank you. Hello from Bloomington. Today, the Bloomington City Council has voted unanimously to start to prepare action on utility shutoffs. Next week, they are going to have an in-depth discussion with their legal staff about what additional material they can add to their ordinance in order to act. That took one discussion. How long has it been with you all? I appreciate that you have acted, but Bloomington isn't exactly a progressive town. They're in the middle of also a Republican county. So what I want to emphasize here is that it is very clear, even in the definition of emergency services in 20 ILCS 3305, the whole state statute, which is called the Illinois Emergency Services and Disaster Agency Act, that the emergency services includes in their definition the temporary restoration of public utilities. Ameren, Illinois, Illinois American Water, all of the rest of the major corporations are public utilities. The Illinois Commerce Commission regulates public utilities. The email that you were sent this morning specified very clearly how the existing ordinance, not a new ordinance that needs to be adopted, allows for these emergency powers, which again are not enacted by ordinance, but enabled by emergency statute so that one can act through the Emergency Services and Disaster Agency. Decatur is one of the most significantly affected communities in addition to Springfield. They have had hundreds more disconnections this past month of October. Their positivity rate is up to 20%, and that's before evictions even hit. That's coming for us next, and if we do not do everything that we can, again, proactively, we are going to be in a much more dire strait. That also being said, I know that this is difficult. With our General Assembly effectively disbanded, and with the governor not calling them back into action, he unilaterally governs who gets what sort of emergency funding. I would ask that the budget be secondary to the safety of our residents, because while we can make up debts in the future, we cannot bring people back from the dead. And I'm speaking to you very plainly because that is where things are at. Last time I had checked, we had over 4,000 people on ventilators in our state. The death toll is around 10,000 plus. Most people who are on ventilators do not come back. Our death toll is going to mount. And again, evictions are about to happen. And not every county is like Champaign County, where the public health district administrator, Julie Pride, agreed to talk to Sheriff Dustin Heuerman to stop evictions, just like he had promised to do back in March or April, and hasn't promised again since. So please, more than words, we need you to use the emergency powers that you have available. We are running out of time in Champaign County. Even NPR said earlier that this weekend we have had the highest number of COVID cases cumulative since the pandemic has started. We're running out of time. Please act.
Okay. Thank you for your comments, Alan. Are there any other individuals who would like to participate in public comment at this time? I'm trying to recall if there had been any public comment offered via email today. Certainly there was one or two concerning one of the cases, the zoning Board of Appeal, or the zoning issue that we're going to be talking about in the near future here. So, all right. Okay.
Dennis,
well,
I think
Evelyn
Dr.
Underwood.
Underwood is here.
Yes, I see Evelyn Underwood. Yeah, I call upon you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good
Yes,
evening, everyone. I sent a short email, and so let me read that quickly. The Chief's recommendation 2021 pilot program, Bishop King James Underwood and I, Reverend Dr. Evelyn Underwood, would like to go on record as supporting Mr. Darrell Cruz's draft resolution authorizing policing changes to improve equity in traffic stops, practice, and tactics. We believe that this will put the Urbana City Council on record committing to the change needed. The 2021 pilot program is a good first step. It's a good first step, but we need a more comprehensive program, which is clearly defined in the draft resolution that Mr. Cruz submitted. Thank you for your consideration. Now, I would just like to say there's a lot. I would like to say that 23-page document, we've gone through that, and we see in the latter part, especially, I'm not a statistician, and but we can see in plain view and eyeballing that the disparity, so we can see that, and we know about implicit bias, not evil, but implicit bias. I know about the training and all that. We've been at this a long time, and I can see with Mr. Cruz's document, and also the 2-page informational piece that the chief gave to the mayor, the memo that seemingly, don't you agree, Bishop, that it's a good first step? I would like to say further that we need to have maybe Bishop had a name for it. What did you call that? A short, I don't have that, what he called it. A dashboard report quarterly by race to the public and to the council, just so we won't forget. And that's one reason that we need something in writing. I don't think we're ready for an ordinance or anything of that nature yet, but a policy, resolution. So it'll be in front of the council, in front of the people, that this is very serious and we need to do something. And as I forestated, that first step is a good step, but we need a more comprehensive document. And I think what we're supporting, and others, and we've talked to, people we've talked to, is supporting, is something that the council could do. Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Underwood, thank you for your commentary. Okay, I don't see other raised hands at this point. So I guess we're going to close now public input for this meeting and go to the other parts of the agenda. So is there a staff report?
I do have.
Yes. Do you have one, Mayor? Go ahead.
Yes, I have a number of items. First of all, I wanted to repeat the announcement that the vacant City Council Ward 2 seat is available for people to apply for that. If they go to the City of Urbana's homepage, there's a link to the application. We'll be taking applications until November 30th. The person who is appointed to this seat will fill the seat until the next council is takes their seat on May 6th. So again, on the homepage for Ward 2, applications are being taken for City Council seat. Number 2, I wanted to thank everyone in the public who participated in our use of force listening sessions. There were 3 separate sessions last week. We're still taking comments on the Urbana's use of force, the police use of force policy. They can email that to useofforcepolicy@urbanaillinois.us, and those comments will be taken until 5 p.m. Monday. We had a we had a reasonable turnout over those 3 sessions, both from organizations and individuals who made suggestions. One of the themes that emerged was that we need to have very explicit, and we know this, and that's what's going to be incorporated, language regarding de-escalation. But we also got a number of other good comments. Participants were able to speak for 5 minutes each, multiple times. We had time for Q&A, so it was a reasonable experience, and we hope to do more of those. And I just again want to thank people for participating. Third, I wanted to talk about where we are with our response to the pandemic. This week, we've reached, well, in the past couple of weeks, we reached really a terrible milestone, the one that no one wanted to reach back in the spring, and that was sustained community spread. So I've been on a number of calls with public health leaders, with the governor's staff, et cetera. We are at the point where there's sustained community spread, which means this virus is everywhere. And people need to assume that everybody they come in contact with could very well be contagious. This is a very different situation than we were in even a couple of months ago, certainly in the spring and summer. And it's not where we want it to be, but we're here, so we have to respond accordingly. Our positivity rate has increased. On the governor's call today, he reported that there were 5,200 patients hospitalized in Illinois, and that's a 70% increase compared to 2 weeks ago. So we are dramatically increasing our hospitalizations. 81 deaths, over 11,000 people have died in Illinois. What the governor pointed out today also was that we have no reserve healthcare workers waiting in the wings. Back in the spring and summer, people had signed up from other parts of the country to come help Illinois if we needed it. We don't have that option anymore because every part of the country is in the same boat. That's what sustained community spread means. So those reserve healthcare workers are not available to help us here in Illinois. And our own healthcare workers are exhausted, and we are close to meeting or exceeding our hospital capacity. We have plans in place for surge facilities, but really, this is dependent on the ability of our healthcare workers to stay on the job and stay healthy. And again, we have to assume everybody is infectious, and that is why the messaging has been just continuous about holiday gatherings, avoiding gatherings. It's, the spread is coming from private gatherings, and it hasn't, our own employees aren't immune from this either. So the spread is starting to affect city staff as well. We've responded. We're moving into A and B teams where some employees are on duty one day and another group are on duty another day. That's true in police and also in public works. We have more people being sent home with computers to work remotely. There's a point where we may see an impact on city services. So I ask the public to be very patient and to be patient if this happens, because our city staff is being impacted, impacted by the virus as well. We have been focused on the utilities and evictions. The governor announced that the eviction moratorium for Illinois had been extended, but there are some changes that were made as of November 14th. And it's kind of disturbing that these changes happened. Landlords can file evictions unless tenants give them a written declaration that they should be protected due to reasons related to COVID. So there now has to be a written statement by tenants that they're directly impacted by COVID in order to avoid an eviction. We just got this information today, still digesting it, trying to figure out what this means for how we respond locally, but that is new. We've received information regarding the utility shutoffs. We are exploring all our options. It's not as simple as people think from a legal standpoint. The ICC has stated that they believe, and they are, the authority for regulating utilities. And when local governments take action, there are consequences. So we have to explore what those consequences are. I know how people feel. I know how desperate some people are, and we will do whatever we can, and as hard as we can, to keep people in their homes. So we're just trying to sort all this out right now, and I will be calling the mayor of Bloomington to see exactly what route they're taking as far as a local ordinance. I want to reiterate again how important it is for people to not gather over the holidays, to not gather in private homes. That's where the spread is happening. It's not so much in the schools, it's not so much in other places, but it's in the private homes where people feel safe. They feel like they can meet with a few family members, a few friends, and the reality is everybody has the potential to be positive, and they are in many cases, and we're seeing the result of that. So when you have people getting sick, 2 weeks later you get people in the hospital, a couple weeks later you start to see the deaths. So we are starting, we're just at the beginning of some very, very sad times, and we need people to change their Thanksgiving plans, change your travel plans, stay home, stay apart, and figure out an alternative way to celebrate the holidays, because this is a very, very critical period. The vaccines that have been developed, there's another one announced today, it will be months. It will be months before those can be distributed and before we start to see an effect. So we're looking at, we're looking well into 2021 before we see any relief, and we need to keep as many people safe as possible. So I keep folks updated. As I said, I don't have anything specific I can tell you about local ordinances on utilities, but we're what we can do and what our options are. But again, the state also has a great deal of power in this regard, and I'm going to be on a call with Governor Pritzker tomorrow, and they're going to be announcing new mitigations, and I will bring up the issue of utility shutoffs and evictions with the governor's staff tomorrow, and the governor on this call. And last is I wanted to let you know that we're working on a virtual holiday market. Darius White, who's come on board as of today, will be helping coordinate that. And it will be an opportunity for people to shop safely and to support our local business. Because when you support local business, you support local jobs and families, and keep food on the table and keep people in their homes. So we're doing everything we can to support our local businesses as well. So that's my report for today. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mayor. So we'll
Can I ask Mayor the question?
Yeah, go ahead, Mary Alice.
Thank you. Diane, I'm wondering, and if people have talked about the City of Champaign's ordinance on utility shutoffs, are you aware of the City of Champaign taking action against the utility companies since we're having both termination notices both in Champaign and Urbana?
I'm told that their legal division believes they do not have the authority to do that on a local level.
So at this time, to the best of your knowledge, the City of Champaign is not taking anything into the city's hands in terms of.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but all I know is last time I asked, I believe they said they did not believe they had the authority to act under that particular part of their code. It's not as simple. It's not simple at all. It's very complicated to do this on a local level. So that's why we need to do the research in order to determine this. And I know time is of an essence, but we also have to be able to do the research to do this.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, it's one thing to have an ordinance and it's another thing to have some kind of enforcement mechanism. So I'd be very interested in any communities that have been successful in those enforcement mechanisms.
Well, we're trying to find out. So far, we haven't found any. That's the issue. That's why in an ideal world, this would happen on the state level.
Okay. All right, thank you.
That's where the authority, that's where the Illinois Commerce Commission is, and that's where the authority lies. And that's why I'm going to make that point with the governor again tomorrow.
Bill Brown, did you have a comment?
Just similar to that, I wondered if you'd had any conversations with John Dwyer or Emergency Services. I think Alan mentioned that the ESDA had some authority to prevent shutoffs.
That's one of the conversations we'll have. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Would if we enacted something, is the legal department concerned that there might be a suit against the city by a utility if we enacted such a? Is that?
I'll let Jim speak to that, and the answer is yes. But here you go.
I would merely back up exactly what the mayor says. Yes, that suit could be very expensive. It would pit, obviously, private utility companies against Urbana. My research is consistent with the mayor's. I have yet to find a municipality in Illinois that has enacted a moratorium on a private utility. I have spoken directly with legal in Champaign, and I've been advised they do not believe they have the authority, and indeed people have represented to them that Urbana has the legal authority. I have today gone through the Illinois Emergency Services Act. Thank you, Council Member Miller, for the quick cite. So I didn't have to, I knew that we had one. I didn't want to have to dig, but in fact, I just went through it a second time just before this meeting. And that is the act that authorizes the governor to issue the executive orders that he has. The act does refer to political subdivisions and municipalities and cities, but as I read the act, and nowhere does it confer the authority on them to act independently to issue private utility shutoff moratoriums. Further, echoing what the mayor said, I have communicated now twice with the Illinois Commerce Commission attorneys in that division, and they indicate as far as private utilities that municipalities do not have that authority, and that has been bolstered by IML's, Illinois Municipal League attorney's opinion. He does say that publicly owned utilities, that municipalities that own utilities have the right because they own them. They're public utilities that they own and operate, but not private.
Jared Miller.
Thanks, Dennis. Well, I'm curious. Is Ameren a privately owned utility? Is it not publicly owned?
Well, it's, when I mean privately owned, I don't mean like a family owning it. I mean, it's an entity that is not owned by a government. Same with Exelon, same with Commonwealth Edison, same with Illinois American Water. They have investors, shareholders. I don't know if Ameren's traded on a public, securities exchange. Same with Illinois Water, but that wouldn't matter anyway. They are privately owned utilities. They are not government owned, nor are they government operated.
Okay, I mean, I guess I don't know if the distinction is between a public company and a private company. I think there's argument there. Anyway, Jim, what I wanted to say was, I know, yes, there is obviously, if we're in violation of the law, there's threat of lawsuits. But, in my opinion, and probably in the larger opinion of the public, you really think that a privately owned utility company is going to sue a municipality for not letting them perform utility shutoffs during a pandemic that would directly be contributed to the death of people in that municipality? You really think they're going to sue them and be like, you should have let us kill people? That's the law. We're allowed to do it. You really think that? So I'm not trying to be justful. I'm just saying I really don't see that actually coming to fruition.
Unfortunately, maybe I'm more of a cynic than most, but I do see that, and I'll explain why. One, they won't look at it the way you or I might look at it, and two, they're going to set a precedent because we have obviously hundreds, if not thousands, of different units of local government, and if they all start adopting their own moratoriums, then at some point they basically shut down the utility. So I think if we're the first, they will come after us. And here's how it will work. Obviously, if we adopt an ordinance and they violate the ordinance, we would have to prosecute them in ordinance violation court, just like any other ordinance. They would respond with a suit or with a counterclaim for declaratory relief. And if we're way out on a limb and we have no legal basis, and at this point, may have moral basis and ethical basis, but the way I read the various statutes I've read, I honestly don't think we have a legal basis. The city not only will have to, basically pay somebody to handle this very complex matter, but there's a good chance the city could get hit with sanctions, which would include paying the utilities attorneys. And it could be a very expensive piece of litigation that could grind on for some time. So unfortunately, I would rather be more idealistic, but in my 44 years of doing this kind of stuff, plaintiffs or organizations like that do this to set a precedent as much as deal with the particular issue. By the way, ICC and the utilities, including Ameren and Illinois Water, have entered into a voluntary moratorium arrangement. I don't know when it expires. And further, as we head closer to winter, and I think it's December 1, there's a statute, if I recall correctly, that prohibits shutting off heat because somebody can't afford to pay. There are metrics in terms of when they can do that and when they can't.
Well, in any case, I know we're talking about it, but at some point we can get a response to that specific language that I had cited in there. That would be appreciated, just because I feel like there is legal wiggle room in that language that would allow us to do that. If you see language in there that says otherwise, I do recognize that there's not like a direct line that says municipalities can regulate utilities, and that's really, really what you're looking for in those things. But I'm also not, just as much as you could say that you don't see where that is written, I don't see where it is not written. I don't see where it's explicitly prohibited either. So I think the argument could be made both ways from the statute. Yeah, maybe it's not explicit that we can, but it's also not explicit that we can't. And that would be my legal, let's look into that as well.
Well,
Okay.
if I'm directed to do that by the mayor, I will gladly do that.
Okay, maybe this topic will come back to us as an agenda item in the future. But thank you, Mayor, for the staff report and the comments. We'll go now into the agenda items specifically. Starting with number 6, resolution number 2020-11-059R, a resolution estimating the tax levy for the fiscal year 2020 to 2021. And we have perhaps Elizabeth Hanna here to help us through this. Elizabeth.
I am here, and I'm gonna run through a few quick slides here. So let me share my screen.
Okay.
Okay, are you seeing that now?
Now we are.
Okay. All right. So as we said, we're here to talk about the 2020 property tax levy. And if I can get it to flip the slide. Oh, okay. So I'm just going to run through a few basics on property taxes here for anybody who hasn't been through this before, or perhaps for members of the public who are not familiar with this. In Illinois, properties are assessed at 1/3 of fair market value. That's called the equalized assessed valuation. Various properties may have exemptions that reduce the taxing value. The most common one is the $6,000 exemption for owner-occupied properties. So the taxing value is the assessed valuation less the exemptions, and that's the basis for calculating taxes for a particular property. So as an example, if you live in a $150,000 home, that's assessed at 1/3 of market value, or $50,000. If the home is owner occupied, that additional exemption reduces the taxing value to $44,000, and that would be the amount used to calculate the tax bill. So each taxing district, the city, the school district, the park district, etc., levies their own taxes. The county calculates the total tax rate for a particular property by adding the property tax rate for all of those individual taxing districts that are applicable to that property. For most properties in Urbana, the city's property taxes are about 13% of the total tax bill. Also worth noting, the taxes that we levy now in 2020 will be received by the city in calendar year 2021. So here's a quick look at kind of how the property tax bill in the city of Urbana breaks out. This is for the 2019 tax levy, the revenue that we're collecting now. And as you can see, schools are about 55% of the total. That's the largest piece of the pie. The city is at 13%, parks at 12%, the county at 8%, and everything else is, smaller than that even. So looking at our assessed value over time, way back here in 2009, we were close to 600 million. And then you can see we had a big decrease when the hospitals came off the tax rolls. And then over time, we've been gaining a little bit. In 2018, we had a little blip when the OSF properties were added back to the tax rolls, but then they were later removed. That's the blue part. And so now in 2020, we're estimating that we'll be a little bit above 600 million. For a particular homeowner, the amount of taxes that they pay for the city varies, of course, based on the value of the property, but anywhere from about $369 annually for a property valued at $100,000. I've got a couple of increments in there, but up to about $1,000 a year for a property valued at $250,000. So for this year's tax levy, the mayor is recommending that we maintain our current tax rate, which is $1.3499. We'll talk a little bit about the details, but we levy taxes for 4 different purposes. So we levy taxes for police pension, fire pension, for the library's operations, and for corporate purposes, which is the remaining part that goes into the general fund to pay for services like police protection. So the library tax levy is important because the library is very dependent on property tax revenue. It's the vast majority of their revenue. So the proposed levy for the library is $3.515 million, and that's based on the budget that City Council reviewed for FY21, the current year. That's the amount of revenue they need to make that budget work. So that's an increase of about 1% from the current tax levy. That sounds low, but they had a relatively large jump last year, and they had some one-time expenses in last year's budget. So this is the number that makes their budget work. Police and fire pensions will total together about 3.3 million. And that funding is based on the funding policy that was approved by the City Council in May of 2018. So our funding goal is to fully fund those is to get 100% funded within 20 years. We are in the midst of a 5-year transition plan to get us on that path. And this is the 3rd year of the 5-year transition plan. So this is a $413,000 increase from the 2019 tax levy. That's a large increase, but again, we're ramping up to get on that 100% funding path. And we'd expect to have 1 or 2 more years of fairly large increases, and then the increases should kind of level out. The corporate levy is basically going to the general fund. It's whatever's left after we deal with those other portions of the levy. And we adjust that downward generally to maintain that stable tax rate. So based on maintaining the same tax rate, that is going to decrease about $280,000 or 16%. And that's consistent with the financial forecast. We knew that was coming because of the increases in pension funding. So here's just looking at time at the tax levy and the different components, looking at what we're proposing. The libraries down here in purple, the pensions up here, kind of a similar amount in green, and then the corporate tax levy, the general fund part up here, which, as you can see, has been getting smaller, well, since about 2016. So in order to complete the tax levy process, we will ask you to adopt the estimated levy next week. We do not expect that we will be required to hold a public hearing because the increase will be less than 5%. However, we always welcome public input, and citizens may comment at that meeting or at the later meeting when we approve the tax levy. We would bring the final tax levy to council on December 14th. You would see the tax levy ordinance, an abatement ordinance to abate the bonds. And then we would also have an abatement of the corporate levy to get us to that targeted tax rate of $1.3499. So if we overshoot because we're estimating assessed valuation, that's where we would reduce the tax levy. So that's the short version of tax levy. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, so does anybody have a question for Elizabeth concerning this? I've got one, Elizabeth. Obviously, the diagram you showed us, I guess I could mention 2 things. One, the library does not have the power to levy its own property tax. I don't know if that would ever be an agreement that would ever be reached among the corporate, the entities that collect the property tax. I don't know if that discussion has ever occurred, but the city supports the library through property taxes, but the library doesn't do it directly. we see that the burden of the pension fund continues to grow. Will there be a time in the future where it begins to stabilize or shrink, or will the pension always grow in this community?
Well, always is a long time, but as I said, we're in this 5-year transition period to increase our funding. So what we do know is that if we don't somewhat aggressively fund our pensions, in the long term, it will cost us more because our unfunded liability will grow and grow and grow, and essentially we're paying interest on the amount that we didn't pay earlier. So we had a lengthy discussion about this in 2018, and we adopted a new policy that includes this more aggressive funding approach. So I would expect, so in the 5-year transition plan, and this is year 3, we'll see another pretty healthy increase in year 4. We're completely expecting that. Year 5 is kind of our flexibility because it's sort of a moving target where we might or might not have another fairly large increase. And then after that, the increases it's going to increase every year, but it should stabilize somewhat.
Is it ever based on the number of officers that we, or firemen that we maintain in the community?
Sure. So each year, we have an actuary who does an actuarial report for each of those funds. And it's based on the number of police officers and firefighters, what we expect the wage increases to be. It's pretty complicated. They even have, tables for, how many people do we expect to be disabled and at what age, when do we expect people to die? They have mortality tables that go into those calculations. What do we expect our investment returns on the pension fund assets to be? So all of those things, go into that calculation to help us determine what the funding needs to be.
So a lot of these obligations are extremely long-term for us. As long as a policeman is serving or collecting a pension following a retirement, we have, I can't remember how many officers we have on hand. I think it's 59 or something like that, officers.
That sounds roughly right. It's in the 50s, I believe.
In the 50s, yeah. Okay.
58.
58, and then of course, whatever term of retirement that they serve until they pass is we're obligated to fulfill that pension.
Correct. Now the legislature did some years back implement a tier 2. So I'm forgetting the exact date that the transition happened, but all the officers hired prior to a certain date received, I would say, a better benefit package than officers hired after that date. And officers currently being hired have to work longer, and the pension benefits are a little different.
Okay, thanks. Other questions? Sharice, then Bill.
Has the city ever paid 100% pensions before?
So it's not that we're paying 100% of the pensions. It's that we're working on a goal to have it 100% funded within 20 years. The reality is, even as we get closer and closer to 100% funded, and you should see that gap start to close, we should go from where we are now, which is, I don't know, well, it varies by fund, but 70s to 80%. You'll see that gap get smaller. So, at some point it's going to be 85 and 90 and 95. But because the contributions are recalculated every year, and there's so many factors in play, we may never be exactly 100%. We may be, there may be some years when we're a little better than 100%. There may be some years when we're a little lower, but yes, I think it's achievable.
No, I don't know. Maybe I'm asking the wrong question. What we pay into the pensions now is more than what we've paid before. I guess it's.
So yes and no. At one time, prior to about 2015, we were funding it based on 100% funded over 20 years. And then I want to say around 2015, the mayor at that time made a decision to decrease funding for the pensions in order to direct resources elsewhere in the budget. The budget was very tight at that time. But when we came back later and took a thorough look at what the long-term implications and cost of doing that were, we sat down in 2018 and we did a presentation on that to the council. And I also, at that time, I had an actuary with me there to talk about some of the details, and the council adopted the current funding policy in 2018, in May of 2018.
Okay.
Does that help?
Other questions? All right, I guess.
Bill Brown had a question.
Bill Brown. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Just to kind of summarize the bottom line, I guess, we levy a dollar amount of 8.3 million, 8.4 million, and that's based on an estimate of the EAV. And if that EAV estimate comes in as we expect, we won't get that amount. We'll get about 8.2 million because it'll be abated to our current tax rate, so the tax rate won't go up. So that sounds like other taxing bodies in Urbana, that like the Park District, that are constrained by tax caps can expect about a 2% increase. Is that about right?
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with tax caps because we're not constrained by tax caps, but I believe that it's limited to either 5% or the current rate of inflation, whichever is lower, and the rate of inflation is around 2%.
Okay.
So, yes.
EAV, okay, so the EAV went up by a couple percent, it looks like.
Yeah, and that's hard because we're estimating, that's not finalized at this point. But as you said, if that levy amount would result in a tax rate that's higher than our desired $34.99, then what would happen is the county clerk would calculate for us what the reduction needs to be to maintain that tax rate, and that would come out of the corporate levy, the part that goes to the general fund.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have a desire to have a motion?
I'll make the motion. I'll move resolution number 2020-11-059R, a resolution estimating the tax levy for fiscal year 2020-2021 be sent to full council with recommendation for approval.
Okay, thank you, Jared.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Bill. Are there any questions or discussion from council? All right, I don't see any further, so I ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Miss Wu,
Yes.
Miss Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Okay, and then that motion, I assume, is to send it to City Council with approval. So, all right, so that's fine. We'll go to the next item on the agenda. It's a resolution 2020-11-060R, a resolution accepting a grant from the Lumpkin Family Foundation to study street trees and plant street trees. And we have Scott Tess from our Public Works Department. He's our Sustainability and Resiliency Officer. Do you want to make a presentation on this?
Sure. I'll just mention briefly that I'm very happy to report that we received an award from the Lumpkin Family Foundation to study the distribution of our street trees and our vacant tree sites, and to also study any interactions or correlations to that distribution with race and income. Also very pleased that Lumpkin also funded some remedial tree planting that we would do through contract. So when we get to that point where we're going to be zeroing in on where to do remedial tree planting in the right-of-way, our arbor crews will continue on their normal workload, and we'll be able to pay a vendor to do some additional street tree planting. And I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Does anyone on council have a question or comment? Bill Brown.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Do you know about how many trees $25,000 would fund?
Yeah, we think about 50.
50 trees. And then how do we usually prioritize where we would put trees?
So there's a couple different pathways. Typically when a tree is removed, an existing street tree, it gets put on a replanting list. Now there's, a backlog that could take a year, 2 or 3, but it gets put on a replanting list. There's also a co-op program that the Arbor Division runs. And so that allows folks to actually pay the full cost of the tree planting, of buying a tree, and then the city will plant it. So that's another, list to get on. So, those are the types of policies that once we do the study, we're going to reevaluate and just see if they make sense.
Okay, so if somebody wants to pay for the tree, that consumes staff time. Do they cover the cost of the staff time or only the cost of the tree?
I believe it's just the cost of the tree.
Okay, that might be worth reconsidering because then, staff time's not equally spread between low-income areas and areas that can afford to fund their own tree replantings. As far as the work, so the planting would be planting would be a vendor, and it looks like also the spatial analysis would be contracted out.
Correct.
It seems like that could be. I'm kind of familiar with some of the data that would be used. I'm pretty sure most of it's available public domain except for the tree sites themselves. So it seems like it'd be kind of ideally suited for a potential grad student project. Have you, will we do like a regular RFP for that? And would we reach out to departments at the U of I to work on that?
So one of the things we want to do with the results and the data that we produce is we want to put it on a publicly accessible website in a way that's easy to view. And the city already has a really wonderful resource through a vendor called Davey Treekeeper. We have an internal facing Davey Treekeeper view, which the Arbor Division uses to manage their work and to manage our tree inventory. That same inventory has a public facing view, and everybody can find it. The URL is urbana.mytreekeeper.com. And it's a really wonderful view. It's kind of like a Google map, but there are layers of data that the public user can turn on and off. And so one of our intentions is to, whatever our results are, to put them on that publicly accessible portal. And so we want to use that same vendor so that all flows in.
So that vendor would also do the spatial analysis?
Yes, they are very experienced with doing canopy analysis, urban heat analysis. And I think what we're doing, we're actually going to be stretching them and they're going to be doing some additional things because we want to overlay all of that with some demographic data.
Okay, and then there was a question during public input about the extra amounts for staff. Is that an in-kind contribution by the city?
Correct. That's just staff time. Staff time that's already budgeted.
Yeah. And that's not covered by the grant. That's just staff time that is going to be allocated to this project, basically.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, I think that's all I had for now. Thanks.
Charisse, and then Mary Alice, do you want to also ask a question? No.
Bill asked my question. So.
All right, thank you. Charisse.
I guess my question that I have, because I think about my ward, and what I was thinking about it was in terms of you're talking about racial study Could you be more specific about that?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at like census type data, so census blocks. We're actually contemplating, and I'm happy to take any feedback, we're contemplating looking at two different ways of overlaying race and income data. One is called community development target areas. So this is, I believe this is focused on income. These are areas where the city has taken census data for low income, and they've removed some things like, well, that's low income because it's all student housing, and they're not exactly low income, they just don't report any income because they're students. So they've fine-tuned census data to really get at what is truly low-income neighborhoods in the city. So CDTA, community development target areas, that's one layer. There's a different layer that we may also look at, which is the recently developed Illinois Solar for All environmental justice zones. These were a formula that was developed through rulemaking when the state passed in special incentives for environmental justice areas, low income, higher racial minority. So we want to see if we want to do the analysis for both of these, if we can get all of that in the scope for the amount of money that we've been awarded. And just as two different ways to kind of look at the same type of issue. So that's where we're going with it right now. And again, I'm happy to take any feedback on that.
Okay, because the other issue that I was thinking was in terms of, because we have a lot of street trees in my neighborhood, but the other issue that we have that we could tend to have, and I'll speak for just where my area is, where my mom's parcel is, and that we've got 3 city trees that impinge upon our lot that could possibly also mess with the sewage and the piping, you know, because of the roots and how they go through. So are you taking those types of things in consideration as well? Because that's just like another expense. It's something like what Bill was saying when he said, you know, people who can't afford to just have to put a tree, you know, put a tree where they want. Well, the other opposite side of that is as much as a tree will grow up and provide shade and nice little, you know, critters all over the place. There's also the issue of infrastructure damage on the adjacent lot. So are you thinking in terms of that as well? Because many folks can't just afford also to just have, you know, if their roots are the roots of a tree are impinging on their property and messing with the infrastructure of their homes, they can't necessarily afford to pay for that either.
Well, I'm very familiar with that issue. I just spent $125 on a sewer company for that very issue, and he believes that my street tree is directly over where the sewer line connects with the city line. I don't. So that's if I remember correctly, the sewer line from the house to the street is private property, and so I don't know that we have those in our databases. I don't know that we have those mapped. So I'm not sure we would be able to, but I'll double check on that to make sure that that's the case.
Well, I'm just saying it's something to think about in also regarding, you know, where trees might be put when you're deciding to put that. Is that, you know, are you in an area that may be socioeconomically medium to low to medium, and when those trees grow, don't forget that their roots grow out all over the property owners, and that could possibly cause later issues, and you know, and people may not be able to actually afford that kind of damage for that to be repaired. So it's just something that I'm hoping that you'll also think about that.
Well, I think that's great feedback. And I don't know if that's something that the tree planting crews, the arbor crew investigates when they're, doing new plantings, but I'm going to investigate that with the crew and see what their current practice is. But that's good feedback. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
That the only thing that might come into play in that is to study the root growth pattern of various trees you might select to plant. I mean, some trees probably have more of a taproot. Some trees obviously will spread at the surface a lot more. I don't know which is more preferable, but there you go. Is there any other questions for Scott? Is there a motion then to move this resolution? Mary Alice Wu.
I'll move to City Council for recommendation for approval, resolution number 2020-1106R, a resolution accepting a grant for the Lumpkin Family Foundation to study street trees and plant street trees.
I'll second.
And Bill seconds it, Bill Brown. Other comments or questions for staff or each other? Okay, seeing none, I'd ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Okay, that passes and goes forward to the City Council. All right, next is ordinance number 2020-11-065, an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning code map, the Urbana zoning map, relating to 702, 704, 706, 708 West High Street, and 309 South Kohler Avenue. This is coming to us as planning case number 2410-M-20 from Community Development. And who will do a presentation for us?
I will. Hi,
Kat?
everybody. Yes, Kat.
Okay, thank you.
This is a request to rezone 5 parcels from R3 single and 2-family residential to R5 medium high density multifamily residential. The parcels are located at the corner of West High Street and South Kohler Avenue, 1 block east of Lincoln Avenue. They contain single-family homes and 1 home that has been converted into apartments, and there are no plans to develop or redevelop the site at this time. This is a future land use map. The comprehensive plan identifies these parcels as residential, described as containing primarily single-family residential housing, but may also include a variety of compatible uses, such as duplexes, townhomes, civic uses, institutional uses, and parks where they may be appropriate. For reasons outlined in the staff memo, the Plan Commission has found that the request does not meet the rezoning criteria, and City Council has the option to approve the ordinance to rezone the parcels or deny the ordinance. The Plan Commission voted unanimously to recommend denial, and staff concurs. And the applicants have joined the meeting if you have any questions for them, and I can answer any technical questions for staff.
All right, so we're seeing the map of where this property is located, and it's a zoning map indicating high density and R2 as well. Does the council members have a question for Kat, or for the property owners? This proposal comes to us with a very significant public input coming out of the Planning Commission. Do you want to summarize that at all, Kat? We didn't all attend the Planning Commission meeting.
Sure. So we received about 20 to 25 letters. All were in opposition to the rezoning request. At the public hearing, I believe 4 or 5 members of the public spoke, largely in opposition to the request. 2 members of the public spoke neither in favor nor in opposition to the request.
Yeah, okay. So any comments, any direction from City Council? We could ask the property owners to speak if they wished.
Are they here?
Not
They are,
sure.
and I've asked Jason to let them in as
Okay.
panelists.
All right. James Dubrovny? Or
Yes, thank you.
Dubrovloni.
Yes, sir. My son and I have owned these properties for a number of years now, and we are contiguous to high-density properties on all sides. There's a unit on Green Street that has 25 units in it. As noted by one of the commission members, the 700 and 800 blocks of the State Streets area or the West Urbana Neighborhood Association area is basically all student housing. Although they're zoned as single family, there are no owner-occupied single family homes there, basically, just one or two. And you've just opened up Green Street to what end if you're not going to allow people to make use of that street in a sense? Preservation can have some ugly unintended consequences. What's being preserved here? This is mostly a homogeneous white upper middle class community of West Urbana, and that people of color had been denied access to for generations. And I've personally seen deed restrictions in this area that memorialize forever in the public record that prohibit people of color to own homes there. So over time, these restrictions were outlawed, but the backdrop of this circumstance is that these homes were born from does not merely fade away. And the lack of access and blatant racism got built into the character of this neighborhood over generations. You cannot decouple this inequity from the character. Think about this as you consider what you've been working so long and hard to protect. Higher density gives more opportunity for diversity of race, income, and age in this neighborhood where it's needed most. So let's stop talking about encroachment and start talking about inclusion. What else is being preserved? Certainly not Mother Earth. Old single-family homes are energy hogs. They are leaky and toxic. Transportation and buildings are the two biggest offenders of greenhouse gas emissions. We know that by adding density in close proximity to public transportation hubs, town centers, hospitals, and universities, you can feed two birds with one seed. You're able to build energy efficient structures that house more people in closer proximity, which equals less resource demand. At the same time, you're putting more people closer to the workplace, transit, and services, which saves on vehicle miles traveled. I presume that's why we did Green Street. What was the point otherwise? So the last thing I think this neighborhood needs is to stay stuck in the past. You know, let's build community, let's build diversity, let's build equity, let's build efficiency, let's build density where this city needs it the most. Let's build a future. The backlash that I've received personally on this, I find discomforting. I've been a lifelong preservationist. I own 5 or 6 homes in the State Streets area that are all 100 years old or older. I've invested hundreds, if not millions of dollars between taxes and purchase prices of these in the city of Urbana. I maintain those. I own a building in Champaign that's an old schoolhouse. I'm not against preservation. I live preservation. I live in a 100-year-old house myself. The most modern building I live in is my office, and it's 60 or 70 years old. There comes a point when, and this may be a futile gesture, but I believe in going through the process, and hopefully my voice can be heard as this council decides what is the future of this neighborhood? Which direction is it going to go as we go through new planning process and new comprehensive zoning, or whatever that is that they're talking about? I wonder how many people of color were on the last one of these commissions that put this project or these zoning restrictions together. How many? There are none. I can think of no Black owner-occupied single-family homes in the State Streets area. There may be one or two, but I've been in that neighborhood for 40 years now. And I walk around and I look and see who lives there, and I'm not seeing it. You can put all the Black Lives Matter signs out you want in the front yard, but until you start bringing people in that can live there and make it hospitable to them, I don't know. It seems like a lot of talk to me. So I hope you do consider this in the vein in which it was presented. I don't have any plans for these properties, nor does my son at this point in time. I'm 71 years old. Probably the last thing I want to do in my life is develop something. I'd like to kick back and retire. So it's more of a, what about my future? What do I leave to my grandchildren? I'd like to leave them a nice piece of property if possible. And that's kind of what the basis of this is. But I don't see that it's incompatible with the neighborhood as it stands. And thank you very much for your time and your consideration. I know it's hard under these circumstances and these times to do what you're doing, and you got a lot on your table. So thank you for your consideration.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your input. So discussion then? Yes, Mary Alice Wu.
I'd like to just make a motion so we can have a discussion, if that's all right.
Certainly, you may.
I'd like to make a motion that we deny ordinance number 2020-11-065 and ordinance amending the Urbana zoning map 702, 704, 706, 708 West High Street and 309 South Kohler Street, plan case number 2410 M20.
All right, Mary Alice Wu makes the motion.
I'll second.
Sharice Hersey seconds it. Okay, well, let's discuss now. Mary Alice Wu.
So I'm sure everybody knows I'm the representative for Ward 1. These 4 properties, 5 properties are in Ward 2, which is currently vacant. I do want to speak for a little bit about some of the plans. So right now we are talking about doing a comprehensive plan. The existing comprehensive plan that we have clearly delineates the 800 and the 700 blocks of the state streets. The 800 blocks from South Illinois to Pennsylvania are in the Lincoln-Busey corridor. And there was a very clear plan in terms of what the comprehensive group thought would be best in those cases. It doesn't go up to Green Street, but the clear line there was Busey Street. And so our 2 single-family houses was going to be on the east side of Busey Street. I have spoken to some landlords who actually own properties right across the street from these. They do not want to see this rezoned into a higher density. They like the fact that the neighborhood has less density the farther south that you go. It recruits people who want a quieter community. I live on the 800 block, and I have a neighbor who is African-American, single family residence right across the street from me. Not to say that the West Urbana neighborhood couldn't have better diversity, more people within the single family households from all different kinds of groups. It is true that this is a student area, but it is a mixture of student and single family residences. So I don't think now is the time that we should consider reclassifying these parcels when we are just now discussing what the new comprehensive plan is going to be. And the existing comprehensive plan that we have on the books right now clearly states that this is not high density. So those are my initial thoughts. I will say that there's been a lot of conversation amongst the neighbors in that area who are vehemently against the rezoning of these properties. But I felt like I had to put a little bit more out there just because we don't have a representative for Ward 2.
Okay, appreciate that. Other commentary? Yeah, Sharice.
Since he brought it up, I feel compelled to say something regarding the diversity of the housing. And I'm aware also of the history of the lack of diversity south of University Avenue. I'd like to know how many African Americans he has living in his properties.
Oh, so I guess that's a question for James.
Mm-hmm.
At any one time, I would say they're all students.
Mm-hmm.
10 to 15%, sometimes none, sometimes more. I've been doing this for my whole life. So
Okay.
I can't narrow it. I have students from all over the world. I prefer grad students because they tend to stay there longer and they're a little better behaved, but most of the undergrads are in student housing at least till they're juniors or seniors before I ever get to see them.
Mm-hmm. So your properties, in and
I have
of
property at 402 West Elm in Urbana, which I believe to be the oldest single-family residence in the city of Urbana.
Mm-hmm.
And a number of years ago, the city had a program where they would loan you X amount of dollars if you would agree to participate in low-income housing, which I did, and I borrowed the money, and I still owe the money. Gets paid back whenever I sell the property, but I've owned it for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And in any number of different times, I've had low-income families living there.
So are you saying, okay. All right.
All right.
But, you know,
But
it doesn't make any difference to me.
About
Somebody
rezoning, how many African Americans have you had living in those properties?
I'm sorry, miss?
I said the properties that you're talking about rezoning, what's your diversity within those properties?
Well, my son owns 2 or 3 of those properties, so I can't speak for him. I don't know who he had in those properties. The 2 that are mine, one I just bought last year, and I don't know who's living there. My other son rented it out for me, and I don't know who the tenant is. The other one is, I believe, that's at 702, and he did the rental there also, but it's typically been women that have lived there. It just seems one stays and gets 2 or 3 others to come in, and then they graduate and it kind of rolls over. So I don't know. I'll find out for you.
Okay.
But I mean, I don't ask that on my applications. I don't ask, you know, the only way I would know is if I went there and visited with them.
It was just that you brought up the fact that historically there has been very few Black folks that have lived in that neighborhood, and
right.
I'm highly aware of that. But
I'm just hoping that this next go around, and I'm not kidding myself. I don't think you guys are going to pass this, but the next go around, when these things are looked at, that people of color are included in the process of deciding, hey, where do we need more housing? How do we get more housing there? How do we get diversity in this neighborhood? How do we provide that access?
I totally understand what you're
speak for themselves. The numbers speak for themselves, I think.
Yeah. Is there, one might wonder whether there's a difference between diversity in rental properties as opposed to people who are owners of properties in this area. These are all rental.
I would think there is more diversity in properties just because of the dollars and cents involved. You know, if I can rent a room for $300 a month to $500 a month, that's a lot different than having to pay a mortgage of $1,500 to $2,500 to $3,000 to $4,000 a month, and the taxes and the things that go with that. So the dollars and cents drive that.
Other questions? Mary Alice Wu.
I don't really have a question. I just have more of a statement, which is, out of all of the new properties that I've seen developed in that whole area, I know that the starting rates are $750 per bedroom. So for a 2-bedroom, that's $1,500 for an apartment. For a 4-bedroom, that's going to be $3,000 for an apartment. So I'm not entirely sure if that property would be redeveloped if what the clientele that it would draw most likely would be university students. Not to say that's bad or anything, but it would be more of the same that's already in that neighborhood is my point.
Well, either that or young university professors or assistant professors or staff. There's a lot of other people around there that maybe they're close to the university but don't have an affiliation with it. Maybe they want to work downtown Urbana as that gets redeveloped. Again, I come back to this Green Street corridor. Why did we do that if we're not going to let people live around it and utilize it? So, don't know.
Okay. Other comments, questions? All right. All right. So I guess I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on this one.
Dennis, can I just clarify something?
You can.
So this is a motion to deny. So if it's yes, then you're saying it's kind of the opposite, right? So I just wanted people to be clear in terms of what a yes and no means for this one.
Yeah, so a vote to support the denial would be a yes vote. Bill Brown.
Yeah, I'll just comment that some of these arguments are probably good arguments to make during the next comprehensive plan overhaul. Our current plan is pretty clear about this being R3, and that's supposed to be sort of a buffer between the MOR district on Green Street and the R2 to the south. So, duplexes are allowed. I guess you could get 2 4-bedroom duplexes on some of those lots. One of them looks pretty small. I don't know if you could get 2 4-bedroom duplexes on that, but there's some allowance for increased density, duplexes or townhomes, something like that. You could also combine those and do a planned unit development. I think, there's some options there, but going to R5, definitely I don't see being supported by the comprehensive plan as it is.
Okay, I guess Phyllis.
Okay, are we ready?
Apparently we are.
Okay, now the motion that Mary Alice made and Cherie seconded, that was for this particular thing and not just for the fact that you were talking about denying this. Am I correct? So when I call the roll this time, it's going to be to deny it completely?
Is that correct, Mary Alice?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Thank you.
So that doesn't go anywhere then. All right, and we'll probably revisit the development and the zoning of many districts near the university as the comprehensive plan is, the new comprehensive plan is created in the coming year. All right, then the next item of business is ordinance number 2020-11-066, an ordinance approving a right-of-way license agreement with the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District. Okay, Justin, are you going to present this one for us?
Yeah, and I don't really have much of a presentation, but this ordinance would approve a license agreement between the City of Urbana and the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District for the installation and operation of an underground electric transmission line connecting proposed solar power plant to a hydrogen fueling station at on the current MTD campus. So as exciting as the solar farm and the hydrogen station might be, this is specifically addressing the underground power transmission line. So that would run along Hickory Street, which is a short stretch of road north of University Avenue. The license agreement stops at University Avenue because that's actually IDOT right of way, and they'll have to get a separate license agreement with IDOT for that portion of it. And then this type of agreement is actually typically just approved with by executive authority by the mayor because it's all underground utility. And we've reviewed and approved this within Public Works. However, since this agreement is with the MTD, it's technically an intergovernmental agreement and requires city council approval. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Other questions? Mary Ellis.
I'm always curious how you come up with the rental fee, the annual fee of $967.20.
Yeah, there is a linear foot fee in the fee schedule for license agreements for the right of way. So, so there's a number that, and it's actually adjusted each year, and the license agreement allows for us to adjust it each year to match the consumer price index. So, so the applicant gave us their number. So just the measurement of the length of their underground utility, and we apply that to it.
So you just plug it into a formula. Okay.
Could you explain, Justin, how it is that the MTD department owns a piece of property in what is right next to, I guess, Emulsicote, or maybe it's not Emulsicote. It's our is it our landscape development center? It's not that either, is it?
The location of the solar farm is actually on Urbana and Champaign Sanitary District property.
Yeah.
So I believe that there's a separate agreement set up between the two agencies for the use of that land as a solar farm.
Yeah. Okay. So, and what about the hydrogen collection or storage unit, tank, or whatever it's going to be? What can you explain that part?
Yeah, there's a I don't know too many details of it other than MTD is working on getting some hydrogen fuel buses, and has submitted plans to the city for some site plans or site development for the addition of a hydrogen fueling station to fuel those buses. So they'll be converting.
So there'll be some storage there.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't looked at those plans in a while. MTD would have to describe that whole their whole setup there and what's proposed, but I believe there'd be some fuel storage on site.
Okay. Bill Brown.
Yeah, I'll move to send ordinance number 2020-11-066 to City Council with a recommendation for approval.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Will Colbert. Oh, Colbert. Okay. Other discussion? Okay, I guess, yeah, Sharice.
Maybe it's just the word hydrogen that got my attention.
Yeah.
Hydrogen storage, which definitely got my attention.
Mine as well, but.
What are the safety standards regarding that? How is that going to be? I guess that's what I worry about. Is this like underground, like the gasoline stations have underground tanks? Is this how after we vote for this, if approving it, how are they exactly going to store this hydrogen, and what are the safety factors?
So I guess first I'll point out that this agreement is specific to just the underground power transmission line. So it's power fueling the hydrogen station that would otherwise just come from the Ameren power grid.
Okay.
So that's that agreement. To your question about safety concerns, that's fall more under kind of building safety division and a little bit the fire department too on the safety measures that are put in place. But included in that site plan review are building safety plans and fire hazard plans and things like that. So there are standards in place to protect against.
Okay. Okay.
Guess we'll discover that in the future.
Yeah.
All right. Other comments or questions? I guess we could have the roll call from the city clerk.
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Okay, so that passes and we'll go forward to the city council. The next item is ordinance number 2020-11-067. An ordinance approving, oh wait, we just did that one. Is 2020-11-067, yes. An ordinance amending Urbana City Code, Chapter 3, Section 3-43, increasing the number of Class R and T-1 liquor licenses for Balderadas, Porchetta, and Sicilian sausage at 300 South Broadway Avenue, Urbana, Illinois, in Lincoln Square Mall. Mayor, is that something that, as liquor commissioner, you would like to comment on?
It absolutely is. So Balderadas has requested an R&T1 license, restaurant and tavern license. They're located in Lincoln Square. They currently sell sandwiches. They do not have a liquor license. They want to expand their business into another part of the food court and offer beer, wine, mixed specialty drinks, and desserts. And this is a license that will allow them to do that.
Okay. Are there questions for the mayor? Yes. Jared Miller.
Not a question, but I'll make a motion if the chair to entertain it.
Yep, I certainly will.
Move ordinance number 2020-11-067, an ordinance amending Urbana City Code, Chapter 3, Section 3-43, increasing the number of Class R and T-1 liquor licenses for Balderadas, Porchetta, and Sicilian sausage at 300 South Broadway Avenue, forward to full council with recommendation for approval.
And I'll second that.
Okay, seconded by Mary Alice. Any conversation? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Okay, that passes and it goes forward to the city council. The next item is ordinance number 2020-11-067. An ordinance approving, oh wait, we just did that one. Is 2020-11-067, yes. An ordinance amending Urbana City Code, Chapter 3, Section 3-43, increasing the number of Class R and T-1 liquor licenses for Balderadas, Porchetta, and Sicilian sausage at 300 South Broadway Avenue, Urbana, Illinois, in Lincoln Square Mall. Mayor, is that something that, as liquor commissioner, you would like to comment on?
It absolutely is. So Balderadas has requested an R&T1 license, restaurant and tavern license. They're located in Lincoln Square. They currently sell sandwiches. They do not have a liquor license. They want to expand their business into another part of the food court and offer beer, wine, mixed specialty drinks, and desserts. And this is a license that will allow them to do that.
Okay. Are there questions for the mayor? Yes. Jared Miller.
Not a question, but I'll make a motion if the chair to entertain it.
Yep, I certainly will.
Move ordinance number 2020-11-067, an ordinance amending Urbana City Code, Chapter 3, Section 3-43, increasing the number of Class R and T-1 liquor licenses for Balderadas, Porchetta, and Sicilian sausage at 300 South Broadway Avenue, forward to full council with recommendation for approval.
And I'll second that.
Okay, seconded by Mary Alice. Any conversation? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Okay, that passes and it goes forward to the City Council. The last item on our agenda is in a 2019 IDOT traffic stop presentation and 2021 pilot program. Brian Serafin, are you going to be, oh, the mayor wants to speak. Okay, go ahead. She raised her hand.
I just want to introduce this and I'll turn it over to Chief Serafin and Melissa Hendrian. I just wanted to let folks know this is really a two-part presentation. The first is the presentation on the statistics from the 2019 traffic stop report. The second is the Urbana Police Department's proposal for really radically changing their approach to traffic stops. My goal, as I told Chief Serafin, was to eliminate racial disparities in traffic stops. And he has worked with his staff, his team of officers and staff, and they have come up with a proposal that I think will get us very close to that, if not achieve that goal. So I'm really happy to introduce this, and I'm looking forward to hearing the report. And really, the most important part of this presentation is the second part. But take it away, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And you've already tried to cut to the chase a little bit, but let me start by Mayor, Council, citizens, officers, whoever happens to be watching this. I just want to say thank you for your patience, first of all. Normally this comes out in spring, early summer, and 2020 has been a bit of a challenge for us on a variety of fronts. So I thank people for their patience. You know, we have been, as you've read through the materials in 2003, when this legislation initially passed, that for 16 or 17 years now, we've been reviewing traffic stops. I have had an opportunity to talk with others from around the state, and Urbana has clearly go above and beyond what we've done here as far as studying this information. Tonight, Melissa Hendrian, the crime analyst, is going to sort of present her report, work through the slides, and we'll answer some questions and whatnot. Then as we move forward, I want to make sure that we get a chance to spend a little time in what the proposal is for 2021 as we try to move forward. So at any rate, those are, I just wanted to make a couple of quick remarks, and now I will hand it over to Melissa, who Jason probably has to have some sharing capabilities of some sort granted her, please, sir.
She should be good to go.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so the report was included in your packet. So this will just be going over kind of the highlights of what happened in 2019. This does not include any of the data from 2020. The data is an anomaly. We've discontinued essentially traffic stops starting in March, and it's been different from what we have done in the past. So this report is only including 2019 data. Okay, so we'll go through the sections, the contents that were included in the report. So we'll go over generally the number of stops that Urbana Police conducts. We'll talk about benchmarks, disparity ratio, the decision that an officer makes to stop a car, and we can break down the disparity ratios into step stops and non-step stops. I'll consider a new analysis that we did in 2019, the veil of darkness. We'll also look at the outcomes of stops, looking at citations versus warnings, and then more serious things that can occur that begin as a traffic stop. And then I'll turn it over to Chief Serafin to talk about our pilot traffic stop plan for next year. So the Urbana Police Department, on average, conducts about 2,500 traffic stops every year. This varies year to year due to different staffing patterns and how many are overtime budget for step details. And so this number has a fair amount of variation over the years. In 2019, we conducted 3,245 traffic stops. So to tell whether our 2019 numbers are outside of what we would expect based on our range in the past, we compare generally a 5-year average to 2019, and we look at the standard deviation. And so what that does is it takes the average and it compares it to kind of the spread year to year. So our 2019 numbers were 3245, and we're comparing it to the average of 3,500. So is that different enough that we want to pay attention to it? Our standard deviation was 404, so it's 35, 37, plus or minus 404. And so our numbers for 2019 fell within that range. So based on what we've done in the past, that number falls within that. Our Z-score, which is our kind of our indicator, if that is less than 1 or greater than 1, or less than -1, greater than +1, then that falls outside kind of what we would expect, and we want to look at that a little bit closer. This does not. So this is within our expected range based on the variation that we've seen in the past from our numbers. And we'll do more Z-scores later, but it's helpful to start with kind of a basic one. Okay, so this is the demographics of the drivers that we've stopped in Urbana during traffic stops. This is a number that we know. And then we will talk in just a minute on how to compare it to kind of our baseline or our benchmark of drivers on Urbana city streets. But we'll talk first about kind of what our breakdown has been of stopped drivers over the past, looking at here back to 2010. And so you can see that of the total number of stops that we've done, our black drivers that we've stopped in 2010 made up about 38%. In 2011, that was 34%. In 2012, that was about 30%. And then from 2012 all the way through 2018, it was around 30%. So there's not much variation here in looking at the past 5 years. In 2019, that number was 33.62%. Asian drivers made up anywhere from about 8% all the way up to 11%. In 2019, that number was right around 8%. Hispanic drivers make up about 5% of the percentage of drivers that we stop in Urbana. And then white drivers make up anywhere from 47 all the way up to 57%. This number has quite a bit more variation. So we'll talk more about, I said we'd come back to the Z-scores, and here we are. In 2019, our percentage of black drivers that we stopped was 34%, compared to our 5-year average of 29%. Our standard deviation, so we're looking at kind of our range of the past 5 years, our measure of whether this is something that stands out, it's 2.48%. So this is it is a significant change from the variation that we had seen in the past. We stopped fewer Asian drivers, and that is a notable difference. We stopped more Hispanic drivers as a notable difference as well, and stopped fewer white drivers than what we had done in the past. So it tells you that all of our numbers in 2019, our breakdown of races that we made, drivers that we made stops of, was significantly different than what we had seen compared to our 5-year average. So then we calculate the disparity ratio. So what does this mean in terms of, are we stopping more drivers? So we're stopping a higher percentage of drivers, but what would we expect to see based on our driving population or the people that are driving on Urbana city streets? So we know the numerator. We know the percentage race of our stop drivers. This is indicated on every traffic citation or warning that we issue. What we don't know is the percentage race of all drivers on Urbana city streets. This exact number is unknowable. It's not something that we are able to capture with a great deal of certainty. So what people have done in the past is they use proxies. Up through the 2018 IDOT report that they put out, they used the breakdown of the census, the 2010 census, looking at individuals aged 15 and up. They changed the methodology quite a bit in 2019. We can talk about that later if you're interested, but it's quite a departure from what they've done in the past. What we have used and what we had decided to use in, I think it was 2016 or 2017 with council, is to use the breakdown of race of drivers involved in traffic accidents within the city of Urbana. So this is a better measure of individuals that are driving within our city, because about half the drivers that we stop here don't live here. So we have, we've got the university, we've got Carl, we've got, lots of traffic in and out of the city. And so we're not trying to measure the percentage race of stop drivers compared to the percentage of individuals that live here, because that's not an accurate representation of, our population on city streets. So we'll break it down for 2019. 33% of our drivers that we stopped were African American. And then when we look at our accident breakdown, 24% of our drivers in accidents within the city of Urbana were Black drivers. So that gives us an overall disparity ratio of 1.38. What that means is a Black driver is 38% more likely than we would expect, based on our estimated driving population, to be stopped in a traffic stop in the city of Urbana. So these are the demographics that I had mentioned previously. Up through 2010 or up through 2018, IDOT used the census figures that estimated our population as being about 19% Asian, 15% Black, 5% Hispanic, and 60% white. When we look at the accidents, we use a 3-year rolling average, and that number is quite a bit different. So from 2013 to 2015, we had 10% of our drivers involved in traffic crashes, both at fault and not at fault, were 10%. Black drivers made up about 18%, Hispanic drivers about 3.5%, and white drivers about 67%. And that number has changed composition over the years. There is variation year to year. We use the 3-year rolling average to make sure that we're kind of leveling out any of the big swings, and we're getting a bigger number so that it kind of levels out some of these irregularities. But from 2017 to 2019, this number for Asian drivers drops down to 8.6%. For Black drivers, it's 24.41%. Hispanic drivers is at 5%, and then white drivers is just under 60%. So when we use that as our denominator, then we calculate our disparity ratio. So we can look at this over time. You'll remember a disparity ratio of 1.0 means that the driver is just as likely to be stopped as we would expect based on our driving population. So that is this yellow line here. You can see that there is significant variation by race, by year. So so our purple line here is African American drivers. This is consistently the highest of any race. It is significantly above the yellow line. In 2010, a Black driver was 111% more likely than we would expect based on our estimated driving population to be stopped in the city of Urbana for a traffic infraction. That number has decreased over the years, but it is still, we still see significant disparity. In 2018, it was 1.36. So a Black driver was 36% more likely to be stopped than we would expect. And then in 2019, that number was 1.38. So a Black driver was 38% more likely than we would expect to be stopped based on our estimated driving population. That is in comparison to some of our other racial groups. So you can see that Hispanic drivers have changed over the years. They represent a small percentage of our stops, so a small fluctuation can result in kind of a bigger leaps here. And then our white drivers are consistently underrepresented in our traffic stops. So, starting in 2010, a white driver was about 30% less likely to be stopped than we would expect based on our estimated driving population. That number was 23% less likely than we would expect based on our population in 2019. So we did an additional analysis this time, and those of you that were around in 2015 for the Traffic Stop Commission report, they did this analysis then, and then I had a U of I stats class redo it in the or they started in January. We had some in-person meetings, and then with COVID and the university shutting down, we had some online meetings, but they set out to replicate this study. So what this does is we're shrinking all of our 3,200 stops, and we are taking only the stops where we can separate these into, is it daylight or is it nighttime, and can it be either day or nighttime based on the time of year. So, you know, if I leave for work at 6 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, it's going to be dark outside. But if I leave for work at 6 o'clock in the morning in June, it's going to be bright outside. So that would be a time where it could be either light or dark, depending on the time of year, depending on the date of the year. So this assumes it's controlling strictly for visibility. So what we're doing is we're binding it by about 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. I don't know that they got on the NOAA web, the National Oceanic something website, where they could classify every single time, every single stop that we did, you know, whether it was within the bounds, and then whether it was a daytime stop or a nighttime stop. We excluded the twilight stops, where visibility was a little bit more questionable, but then we were able to differentiate stops into, you know, we're controlling for the driving population. This does not have a benchmark. We're assuming that people have the same behavior regardless of the month. So if you come home from work at 5 p.m., you're going to come home from work at 5 p.m. regardless of whether it's January or it's June. If you take your kids back and forth to school or activities, if you go to the gym, go to the bars, this is assuming that people have kind of the same general behavior regardless of the time of the year. So this is controlling for officer visibility. So if we can, if an officer is able to discern the race of a driver based on whether there's light outside or not, we would expect to see a different percentage of Black drivers stopped during the daytime versus during the nighttime. So results of this analysis indicated that we stopped the same proportion of Black drivers during the daytime versus during the nighttime when we're bounded by the times of the year. However, there is still a persistent disparity. So the disparity exists both when officers can see and can discern the race of the driver based on the visibility versus when they cannot. So what's going on? Can we break this out a little bit further and see if there's some answers to these questions? So there's a step program that we do here. Officers are able to sign up for overtime shifts where the only thing that they're doing during those shifts is running traffic. And then we also have non-step stops. So the step stops are in green up here and the non-step are in blue down here. The non-step stops are stops that are conducted while an officer is on patrol. So they are on their regular shift. They are conducting traffic stops as they are able, or as based on whether they're responding to calls for service or what is happening during their shift. So about 30% of our stops are step stops, and the rest of our stops are conducted while we're on patrol. There is a significant difference in the disparity ratio between step stops and non-step stops. And so you can see our purple line is Black drivers, still consistently above the yellow line until 2018. And this is when, those of you that were around will remember, with this presentation that we had with Sylvia, we moved the locations of the step stops to be strategically where we had high volumes of traffic, high volumes of traffic accidents, and high volumes of accidents that had personal injury. So in 2018, our Black drivers in Urbana were 15% less likely than we would expect to be stopped based on our estimated driving population. So this disparity ratio was less than 1. A white driver was 11% more likely than we would expect to be stopped. And those numbers were very similar in 2019. There's our break where you see the drop start. Non-step stops have a much higher disparity ratio. So these are the stops, these are only the stops that are conducted while officers are on patrol. So you can see this was back in 2010, a Black driver was 124% more likely to be stopped than we would expect based on our driving population. This has decreased over time quite a bit, but we are still looking at a persistent disparity. In 2018, a Black driver was 60% more likely than we would expect to be stopped. And in 2019, that increased slightly to 61% more likely to be stopped than we would expect based on our estimated driving population. So looking at those two together, you can kind of see the, the difference here between our step stops here on the bottom. This is just the disparity ratio for Black drivers versus our non-step stops on the top. So our patrol stops are here on the top. And this is kind of where, this is the direction that we're going here. And there was our departure. You can see where it dropped below the yellow line. So where are we conducting our non-step stops? We are conducting, so we're looking at a map here. This is a density map. The blue is citizen-initiated calls for service only in 2019. Purple are our patrol stops of Black drivers. So our traffic stops, our patrol traffic stops of Black drivers overlaid with our citizen-initiated calls for service. So it appears, based on this, that our patrol stops of Black drivers are occurring in areas that we are spending more time in. So these drivers have an increased chance of exposure. So it's not, it's the location. So these are geographically correlated. And then the other point to look at racial disparity is at the outcome of the traffic stop. So once we know the race of the driver, is there disparate treatment? So about half the time, if you get stopped in Urbana, you're going to get a ticket. The other half of the time, you're going to get a warning, and then there's a small chunk where it ends in something more serious than a traffic violation. So someone has a revoked license and their car has to be towed from the scene, or we find guns, or we find drugs, or we find something, or somebody has a warrant. These things begin as a traffic stop, but end as something that is more serious than that. So we can look at the disparity ratio of our outcomes. This takes the guesswork out. We know the percent race of our stop drivers, and we know the percent outcomes by race. So by dividing these, it gives us another disparity ratio, but this takes any of the guesswork out of it. So looking at our citations, an Asian driver in 2019 was 8% more likely than we would expect based on the percentage of Asian drivers that we stopped to receive a citation. A Black driver was 15% less likely, a Hispanic driver was 3% less likely, and a white driver was 9% more likely than we would expect to receive a citation compared to the racial breakdown of drivers that we've stopped. Looking at our warnings, an Asian driver was 8% more likely, a Black driver was 1% more likely, Hispanic driver 33% less likely, and a white driver was right even, or the percentages were the same. More serious than a traffic violation, and I don't have this on here, I believe it's 174. So this is a small percentage of all of the traffic stops that we do, but we will include these numbers here. The disparity ratio for Asian drivers is 0.29, so much less likely than we would expect based on the race, based on the percentage, the breakdown of stop drivers. A Black driver is 94% more likely to have an outcome of something that's more serious than a traffic violation. A Hispanic driver is 33% more likely, and a white driver is about 40% less likely. When we dig into these, it is included in the report. It is not included in the slides. Most of these are non-discretionary. So if someone has a warrant, if someone has a revoked license, this is automatically going to elevate to something. There's not discretion applied here. Okay, so in summary, in 2019, we had a decrease in the number of traffic stops, though this was not notable, and we decreased our proportion of step stops to overall stops. There was a slight increase of disparity ratio with our Black drivers. 34% overall of our stops are with Black drivers, but Black drivers make up an estimated 24% of the Urbana driving population. So our overall disparity ratio of all stops was 1.38 for Black drivers. A veil of darkness analysis revealed no statistical difference in the proportion of Black drivers stopped when controlling for officer visibility. Our non-step or a patrol stop disparity ratio is higher, and it's correlated geographically with our citizen-initiated calls for service. That non-step disparity ratio is also higher than our overall disparity ratio. It was 1.64 for Black drivers. And then at the decision point of the outcome of a stop, a black driver is less likely to receive a citation. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. I can take questions now, or we can move it to Bryant first.
Okay, so thank you very much. That's a lot of data.
It is.
You crunched it rather amazingly. Do we have people who would like to ask questions? Yes, Jared Miller. Go ahead.
Melissa, I was wondering if you would be able to respond to some of the points that Durrell had brought up in his most recent email to us. Namely, he had asked about considering multiple methods for getting our percentages rather than the single statistic, because as he says, it is just a single viewpoint, and there are lots of different ways to look at them. And he also asked about separating local residency from non-local stops and see if demographics align then. I don't know, have you looked, I can keep going on to those. I'm sure you've seen his email. Do you have thoughts about, in future analysis, adding any of those things in, and or his thoughts on, you know, the usefulness of the disparity ratio in general versus just tracking the percentage of folks stopped by race?
So this was, you know, the discussion of the benchmark was something that we had come to a decision within council. We use all drivers involved in traffic accidents. However, I did rerun it today and looked at the not at fault percentage. So that's the argument, right? That a not at fault, you know, when there is a traffic crash, there's a driver that is determined to be at fault and a driver that is determined to be not at fault. And the argument is that a better way to measure, you know, equal distribution of individuals on Urbana city streets is looking just at the not at fault drivers. That drops our benchmark percentage for black drivers to a little over 22%. So it is not a very large departure from the numbers that we had run with both at fault and not at fault drivers. It would also be interesting, I think, to look at strictly at fault drivers, because that would be, you know, a measure of violation, right, of riskier driving behavior. So I think it's instructive to keep it together, but, you know, it's welcome to consider it apart as well. Was there another point that you wanted me to directly respond to? We were able to meet with Mr. Cruz earlier last week. So
yeah, and that's why I think he had sent some of those. I just wanted to make sure that if he had brought those up to you, that you guys were aware of them, because we don't get to talk to you very often. It's, you know, I'd be interested if you could follow up with us on, you know, using multiple perspectives as we track this going forward, you know, and what that might look like, and then using, you know, a combination of those statistics to give ourselves a better picture, in addition to also highlighting and tracking the stops just on race by itself, and watching that percentage and how that changes over time as well, because that is another way to look at that. I'm sure many of my other more stat intelligent council members could speak more clearly to that, but I just want to make sure that his points have gotten across, and that we'll get a follow-up from you on those points and about how we can watch those stats going forward. Thanks.
Okay, Charisse and then Bill.
Yeah, could I see the map again where you had the overlay of traffic stops, and if you could zoom it, blow it up a little bit, because I really couldn't read like where any of that was taking place. If you
share
where you have that overlay and the neighborhood stuff. Because I'm interested in seeing. Yeah, can you? And me putting my glasses on is not going to make
Not
much
as far.
difference.
So
Okay,
this is
since I'm not
actually
seeing it all that well, maybe you can tell me the big blob in the middle.
Yeah, so this is to orient yourself here. This is Vine. This is University.
Okay.
We've got Lincoln, Bradley, Colorado, Florida.
So you get calls, the blue areas going from teal to like a seafoam or seafoam to a darker kind of
Yeah.
color.
The contrast is not great looking.
Oh no, I love the color structure. These are the areas where you get the most calls?
That is correct.
From citizens?
Yes.
And then the purple going from kind of lavender into a deep dark royal purple, that's those are accidents, or those are
that is the highest, those are our concentration of our particular stops of interest, which is Black drivers that we stop while officers are on patrol.
Oh, okay. So this is when officers are on patrol, and so what is the lighter purple areas? What do they represent? The little splotches from.
So the little spot, those are just a lighter density. So we probably had a few stops at this corner, but not enough for it to be like that deep dark purple. So this is kind of like a.
So University and Vine, which turns into Cunningham.
Yeah,
right?
So 5 points. And we would expect this to have a, like when we look at all, we have a lot of accidents here too. This is a really a highly traveled road.
And Bradley and
we do
Lincoln.
see more of a concentration in some of these residential neighborhoods too.
But Bradley and Lincoln, I noticed that's also a high. Why is that such a high density area?
For calls or for stops?
For stops.
The officers are able to make stops while they're on patrol, and this is an area where there are lots of stops.
Is this an area? Are these two areas those dark purple splotches? We're talking about Bradley and Lincoln, University and Vine, and then there's another dark splotch in the north part of the big blue splotch. Yeah, right there.
Yep.
Are those areas where police are sitting and watching, or are they also, is it what's the call, where you get most of the calls versus I saw you speeding, getting off of the highway or something like that?
So Sharice, Bryant here. I'll go into this a little bit more later as we try to transition to the next program. Essentially, I think what this is trying to at least illustrate is that a lot of these traffic stops are occurring when officers are on patrol, and it's where they physically are. So while someone if they work in a particular beat, or if they're in a particular area and they see somebody roll through a stop sign, as they get done handling another call, they might address that particular stop sign violation. Or, well, hey, I'm in my beat. Well, I'm waiting for the next call. Maybe I'll sit and watch this stop sign or watch that, or run radar in this particular area. But it's left to a great degree, to what the officers can find, or what maybe they've heard from complaints and those things. So it's not necessarily they're called there for that specific question, or that specific problem, if I understand your question.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to determine is that, because I guess my theory is basically, if you're always looking for the negative, you're surely to find it. So what I'm saying is that if our police like posted at certain areas where there seems to be a high violation area?
No, they are not formally posted there.
Okay.
So
it's just while they're patrolling, and
while they're out patrolling, or if they know that, hey, Mrs. McGillicuddy is complaining about somebody at the stop sign, they might be in that particular area. But no, they're not formally posted there. And that'll speak to part 2 of this presentation here in a little bit.
Okay.
Are there other, Bill Brown? Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. It's really great to see all the work you've done on detailed data. I did notice, I mean, one way we can also address the disparity issues is to look at the reasons for the stops and disparities. And like a couple of years ago when we started the fix-it ticket to try to reduce the equipment violations. Can't tell if that's actually working. I don't know if there's enough of a sample for that, but definitely in 2018 it was higher. I think that was when we had started the program, and maybe officers were kind of anxious to give out the fix-it tickets and might have been making more equipment stops just to give out the fix-it coupons, not a ticket. But it's back down to more about normal, it looks like. But the one that stuck out to me was the license and registration violations were way up in 2019. About 20% of black drivers stops were for license and registration violations, and normally it was closer to 10%, maybe 15%, the highest year before that. Were you able to drill down at all and try to figure out, is that certain age groups or any particular reasons why that was higher in 2019?
I think Bill Bryant here, I'll jump in real fast. I think some of this can actually absolutely be officer driven as well. And so that's one of the things, if you look back a couple of years ago when Sylvia was here as the chief, one of the things that we had done was trying to go out and make it to all the shift briefings, explain what the impact is. And so if one officer makes 25 stops for a particular thing, and I think this one is, if they don't know that, if we don't tell them, hey, you might be, you know that you're doing this, and that's part of the education process here. So I think that, and Melissa might be able to help me out, I think some of that increase was by 1 or 2 of the officers who were working maybe a problem area. So I'll let her, if there's anything else you want to flesh out there, Melissa, at all.
So the fix-it tickets, we did 153 of those in 2019. That has been much lower in 2020, and we can expect that to continue to be an anomaly until after COVID. But yes, Bryant is correct. The license and registration violations was driven by just 1 or 2 officers.
So were 1 or 2 officers targeting? They were just like looking for license, registration expirations. Is that what it was?
So yeah, Sharice, what normally can happen is most officers will perhaps have a couple of things that they know about that something. So it's if a license tag is expired, they might just make that stop, and that's something that they might do. People don't have fuzzy dice anymore obstructing their windshield, but that used to be something that people might stop somebody for. So yeah, this appears to be, and this appears to be something that's more along those lines, where that was a particular thing that officer goes, oh, there's something I can, it's against the law, so I'm going to go ahead and stop that.
Okay.
Right.
Mary Alice.
Thank you, Melissa, for putting all this data together. I know it's a big job. I was wondering, in the previous reports you've done, you've kind of disaggregated the traffic issues, community caretaking, and the targeted patrol, and I didn't see that this time. Was there a reason why you decided not to include that?
So yes, you're correct. That was not included in this, and it seems to be. Right, you're going to help me out with this one?
Yes, I will gladly. So part of the issue with that particular, and I think what you're talking about is the motivation for the stop. And we have some data, and that is, it's always something that the officers struggle with, trying to code a particular thing. What's the motivation for the stop? And in a context that's very like a council meeting, we can, oh, that makes sense, in a way we move on. But when an officer does those, I think it sometimes is difficult. So if I stop them for this issue, is this a community caretaking role, or is it a traffic safety issue? And I think some of these weren't defined very well. So we've had some struggle with this. Melissa, you gave me some numbers. I don't know how, because we're not as confident in those as we would like to be. Generally speaking, I think the traffic safety issue was about 85% of the time. Community caretaking was 12% of the time, and targeted sort of patrol was only 3% of the time. So it seems to be one that we're not as confident in our data as we would like to be.
So I was able to find the last time this was presented, and in 2018 it was 84, 14, and 2. So at least based on if we can trust the data, it seems like it's very similar to previous years. The reason I bring this up is because there's a lot of conversation about pretextual stops, and this is where we got that information from. We got it from this chart. And if memory serves, I believe targeted patrol was synonymous with pretextual stops. Is that correct?
It's not quite that simple. I think generally speaking, yes. So for instance, I dug out an old memo that Lieutenant Sanders had written on this particular topic, and it was trying to, you could have, I guess, the same sort of violation, and if I'm trying to solve a traffic problem, then it's a traffic issue. If I'm trying to solve a particular criminal problem in a specified area, then that would be targeted patrol. It may or may not necessarily equate exactly to pretextual. So the idea with pretextual stops, we've had this discussion. And then the final, it could be community caretaking. So we could have a particular issue that might fall under all three, depending on what that motivation is. So it's just, I guess, like I said, I think the officers kind of struggle with some of these, with some of that data, but it's at least similar to what it's been in the past.
So is the idea that you're proposing to stop collecting that data because it's tricky data, or are you thinking about rewriting kind of how people code those different items?
So we've had some internal discussions, and I think it goes to, we were trying to look at, I know at some point there was some other talk about what the scope of a stop was, and we were going to go beyond the scope of that particular stop. So if we stop somebody for expired license plate and we, in the back seat, see a ski mask and duct tape and a knife, we might go, oh, that's interesting. We're going to ask this driver questions. We've been trying to discuss whether or not is there a better way to kind of drive at some of that pretextual discussion that you're talking about. So I believe the data is still being collected even under 2020's craziness. I don't know what we're going to get out of the 2020 data. So I guess, Mary Alice, to your question is, I don't know just yet. We've been having some discussions about, is there a better way to drive it or drill down to that particular issue?
Okay. And then in terms of the fix-it tickets, they're not tickets, right? They're coupons, so to speak. Yeah. Would those be under warnings? Where would that be classified under?
It would be under equipment. The stop would be equipment violation, and then it is only for warnings.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to confirm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Charisse?
A question that I have is, are the disparities, do they seem to occur more in when there's a citizen calling as opposed to a police officer just happening upon the situation?
So occasionally we will get calls into the dispatch center to report, like, oh, there's somebody that I saw that almost swiped me off the road, and that's called it's a make your own case. So an officer, it can be called out, and then an officer can attempt to make that stop. That's not collected in the data though. So I can see how many of those calls that we get, but I can't match it to whether there was a stop that was made from that call.
Okay.
So that is not, unfortunately, data that I have.
I would offer, anecdotally speaking, Sharice, that'd be a very, very tiny, minuscule amount of any of these are sort of somebody called in to say this person, specifically this red Mustang just almost ran me off the road. Those are that would be very small. Now we might have a citizen call who said, people are running my stop sign all the time. Can you help with extra effort at this
I've made that
area?
call myself.
So we might have those kinds of things, but and those would be the things that might direct an officer when they have some downtime on their shift.
Okay, so most of these stops are based on a patrol officer in the area and notices a particular violation.
Yes, that's correct. And unless you want to try that was part of the analysis of why Melissa was breaking down those that are on the selective traffic enforcement program STEP, where we actually dictate to the officers, these are the areas that you're going to go, versus non-STEP or routine patrol stops when they're out doing their own. Well, I've handled that call. I finished that report. I got an hour before my lunch break. So-and-so's complained about this particular area. I'm going to go work on that. So.
Okay.
Bill Brown.
Yeah, on it's the crash data, the disparity or the driving population calculated from the crash data over the past 10 years is varied from like 18 to 24%, something like that for African American, Black. Using the number of crashes, can you calculate the confidence interval for those? Is it within a couple percent? How much of that apparent decrease in disparity ratios is due to potential sampling error?
Yeah, so that's it. You can see kind of where our percentage of the drivers that were stopping, at least from 2012 up to 2018, of Black drivers maintained about 30. Our disparity ratio, however, went down because that denominator increased. And similarly, in 2019, our percentage of Black drivers that we stopped increased, but our disparity ratio went down because our estimated driving population are looking at the percentage of Black drivers that were involved in traffic crashes also increased. So it was kind of proportional on that. I did not calculate confidence intervals, but that is something that I can do. Yeah.
It'd just be good to know, if you do the bars on that disparity ratio graph that looks like it's going down, and you do the 95% confidence based on the sampling from the crash data, it would be interesting to see how many of those overlap, versus a clear difference.
I got a question, Melissa. One of your graphs showed the breakdown of stops that were done during daylight hours and during evening, twilight, dark hours, and it sounded like the number of stops of African Americans didn't change. So it seemed like it sort of disproved the fact that there was implicit bias in the stops based on whether the officer could observe the occupant or whether it was too dark to observe the occupant. Did that actually, am I interpreting that right?
You are. So we're only looking at the stops from like 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. And so we're taking that and we're breaking the stops into, is it daylight or is it darkness? So would an officer be able to discern the race of the driver should they be interested in that? And if they were, and if there was racial bias in the decision making where you see a vehicle and you decide whether to stop that vehicle, you would expect there to be a higher percentage of African Americans stopped during the daytime when there's enough light to be able to see the race of the driver versus during the nighttime. There was not a significant difference between black drivers stopped when you could see versus when you could not see. But the racial disparity was present at both. So it doesn't appear to be an individual decision making where an officer's visually observing, 5 white drivers before he or she stops the black driver. That doesn't appear to be what's happening based on that analysis.
So at least in one aspect of police policy or practice, we don't seem to be getting a disparity problem. But I'm just looking for like a grain of hope, perhaps, in the rather difficult field of problems that we are trying to sort out.
Yeah.
So I don't know, just noticed it, I guess. It struck me as being rather curiously nice, perhaps.
Yeah. It doesn't appear to be individual officer decision making. It appears to be based on where officers are spending time either responding to calls or doing patrols, and that's the location that they're making the stops. And so that'll maybe be a nice bridge into our part 2 here if no one else has any questions.
Okay, and maybe we can make the bridge.
Great.
Diane has a question.
Well, Diana's but also Jared has got a question. So let's.
I was just going to say, if you want a grain of hope, I think we should move on to part 2 because we do have a radically different approach to traffic stops in Urbana. And then if people have questions going back to the 2019 study, we can always go back to that. But I want to make sure folks, it's 9:48, and I want to make sure you all have enough time to hear what Seraphin and Melissa have to say about part 2.
Yeah, Jared?
Just a quick question on that night stop situation. If an officer is following a vehicle and runs a plate, are they not able to see the racial composition of the driver through what they pull up on their screen if they run a plate?
Secretary of State does not collect information on race of drivers. Is that correct, Brian?
That is correct.
So they don't see, I mean, they can see a name though.
Yes, you'd be the name of the registered owner, I suppose, whether that's exactly the driver or not. But no, there's no racial data on the Secretary of State response.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so now we're gonna transition and we're gonna bridge. So as Melissa started to work on some of these numbers back in the summertime, I formed a little working group of officers, and we had detective, patrol, white, black, male, female, as part of this small little working group, and we kind of decided that we needed to sort of re-examine this. And let's take maybe a different approach. And I said, one of the interesting things is, at least for me, and I can remember this started a couple of years ago when Melissa started to use the geography and the calls for service and the traffic stops and sort of those heat maps and overlaying those, that's where this started. And then when she has now done the math with regards to, or not her, I guess, thank you to the university students, but with regards to the veil of darkness. And how there was no statistical difference on either side of the twilight. The base disparity ratio still exists, but there wasn't anything beyond. And then we looked at, when we discussed the step details, and you look at that and how the disparity ratio for the step details over the last couple of years, when we were much more intentional about where we put the selective traffic details. When we took that all into account, and remembering that the primary purpose of traffic stops is for traffic safety, which when we took all that into account, remembered the primary purpose, what we've decided to try for 2021 is to use the step model for all of our traffic enforcement efforts in 2021. So we would just be using, so there's data out there that would say this is where the crashes occur, these are where the high volume is, this is where the personal injury accidents occur. That's what we want to try to do, is we want to try to use these step details as a model. as we had come to this in our little group, we were very proud, at which point somebody immediately after the group says, well, you know, Fayetteville, they did some Google work, and by God, Fayetteville, North Carolina had done some similar analysis. And what Fayetteville, North Carolina did was, or what they learned in theirs, and I have not read the entire study. It's beyond my sociology 185 stats class abilities, Mary Alice, to remember all of this stuff from way back in the day. But what they learned some things. Number one, it was they decreased their disparity ratio in their traffic stops. And number two, they decreased traffic crashes. And then number three, there was no significant change in any kind of a crime rate. So the proposal is that we would be using, again, that step model for all of our traffic stops. We had made presentations. I've been to all of the shift briefings already, and we started this learning process. This is a dramatic difference, a vast departure from how we've done this traditionally. But what we want to do is remember that we're using traffic safety as our primary functioning, and we're going to function here, and we want to use traffic data, that crash data, just like we did. If it works for steps, we believe it should be effective when it comes to our routine traffic during their time. As the memo had said, which was quite an effort with different people having different parts into it, so hopefully it read cleanly by the end. But one of the questions that we wanted to ask for, or one of the issues we had left over was, well, what do we do if something happens right in front of us that's not in this particular zone? And that's when, and we said, well, if it's a significant traffic issue where there's a life safety danger issue, we still want the officers to address it. So we talked about things like, for example, Goodwin and Fairview, and somebody rolls the stop sign at 3 in the afternoon and almost hits two little girls that are getting ready to cross the street, and the parents and the teachers are pointing at the car, and the officer happened to be sitting nearby. Could they act? Yes. But we want them to act. We don't want them to simply disregard. But if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and they're at Goodwin and Fairview, and somebody rolls a stop sign as they're having a cup of coffee, it's not in a traffic zone, they can't stop that car for that infraction. And so that's just a very quick sort of summary about this. I know that tonight and in briefings and in other discussions about this, there's been a lot of discussion regarding statistical analysis and what denominator do we use, and rolling averages and this average, and study this, and I understand those things, and they might help us perhaps to a degree. But the bottom line is that we're disproportionately stopping our black drivers in Urbana, and how do we change that behavior? And we do it by looking at where the officers are, and let's move them for their efforts to areas that we've designated, just like we do in STEP, in our STEP patrol. So that's the short version of the model. And again, as the mayor has said, this is a vast departure from how we've done our traffic enforcement in the past. So with that, I will let some questions, I'll let Dennis take it over.
Sure, thanks very much. Well, I guess the mayor will start.
I just want to also remind, or this is also consistent with our commitment to Vision Zero, with an emphasis on how do we make our streets safer for pedestrians and bicyclists and drivers. And if our traffic enforcement efforts focus on areas where the traffic accidents are occurring and crashes are occurring, I think we're going to make our communities safer for everybody involved. So this is all going to come together, I think, the way it should.
Bill Colebrook.
Chief, I appreciate it. I think it's an excellent idea. Part of traffic safety is communication, the public information aspect. Has there been any idea of, when you identify the high crash areas, heavily message those neighborhoods that they know that that a certain intersection, we'll just use Lincoln and Bradley, is a high crash area, and somehow message the community that they have entered into a high crash area, and they would expect to see more enforcement at that location as opposed to some other random location in Urbana.
So I don't know if I have with regards to that specific area, like you're entering a particular traffic zone. There has been some discussion about, well, do you release the zones and not release the zones? And I'm not necessarily against it. These are the 15 areas throughout town. And truthfully, I think they might change a little bit over time, but they're areas that you would sort of expect, where we have intersections, where we have higher rates of speed, and I don't have, Melissa might be able to give a little bit more on this, but and I think even tonight's presentation will get some publicity as sort of how we're doing this. Truthfully, I'm not sure if Lincoln and Bradley is actually one of our, there she is, not no.
I just use it as an example. I'll go back to 5 points. Okay, I'll use Cunningham and University.
Right.
Regardless of whether I'm an Urbana resident, a Champaign resident, or I live in Downers Grove, and I'm a visitor to Urbana. If I approach 5 points, I probably would want to know that I'm approaching a high crash area just for my own safety, so I could be a little bit more vigilant and maybe alter my own driving practices. Just a thought.
Okay, thank you.
Mary Alice.
Thank you, Brian and Melissa. It's pretty exciting to hear some new innovative ways of addressing the situation. So thank you for all your time that you've invested in gathering input from a variety of people. One of the things that really changed in my time since City Council is that when I first came on board, I think our disparity ratio is about 1.64. And when the step stops were reevaluated, it was exciting because all of a sudden our disparity ratio really was cut in half in terms of what it was before. So that was really a great step forward, but of course it didn't solve the problem. And so utilizing something that's worked in the past, which is basically concentrating the step stops in terms of where the accidents and the traffic issues are, hopefully will rectify some of the issues that we've been having, the persistent issues that we've been having. So that said, is there a plan? I know, Melissa, I think the first time you and I sat down together, we looked at some traffic accident data and you said, I wonder why we still have stuff over here. And it had to do with construction at one time. So obviously things change as there's detours and reroutes. I think Washington was shut down for a little bit. Vine Street's been shut down. How frequently are you planning on evaluating the accident data so that you can recalculate the step areas?
So we've talked about it a couple of times. It'll probably be at least quarterly. So if it happens that, we have a high concentration of officers out on High Cross and then our crashes move over to Windsor or something. So if people start taking alternate routes or if people become safer where they are, then perhaps we can reallocate. This will be, fluid and based on the data. So we'll be able to take our crash data and reallocate as necessary.
Okay, and how often do we do that quarterly now?
Well, right now I'm doing it monthly, but we're, I think, discontinuing STEP for a little bit. So I'll get an email from the sergeant that sets the, posts the overtime, and he'll say, hey, can you run what we had last October? And so then I'll run what we had last October, and then he'll use that to demo or to see where we should put the steps this October.
Okay, all right. Brian, the example that you gave was a pretty cut and dry example. There's two kids sitting in front of you, you're going to blow a stop sign, you might hit them, versus it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you roll through a stop sign and there's nobody around. Of course, it's going to be more challenging when you get into things that aren't as black and white. So what kind of guidance have you given the patrol people in terms of how to discern what is a public risk here? It's not hitting people, right? We all agree that hitting somebody is definitely a public risk, but there's variants of that.
So that's an excellent question, and we're still working on that. So matter of fact, even we've had some internal discussions, and I don't know that we've come down to an exact definition that we're all happy with. So just a sort of matter of fact, last week as I was going to all the briefings, was to sort of lay this concept out. Let me start with this easy one, if you will, to say, okay, here's the continuum. Everybody kind of understands this, and now we're going to move, I guess, to the more difficult ones. I will tell you that it is my intention that there shouldn't be tons and tons of these, because that's going to be obvious. The next question is it, well, okay, so of the ones that were outside of the traffic zones, what are those numbers like? And, and what were those for? Those should be extremely small numbers. I don't know exactly what that might be. I will tell you that what was it, Melissa? I think we make 8 to 12 stops roughly a day, or we have. I will tell you that, so if we stop 3,600 people in the U.S., that's 300 in a month. For instance, in COVID back in March, I think we went from 300 normally to like 30 stops in the entire month. I would expect that this to drop. This should be for significant traffic safety behavior issues. And to the point that in my opinion, there better be a traffic ticket assigned. We're not going to do this and then give a warning that these should be significant. And I don't know that I have a solid definition just yet, Mary Alice, for you.
So your plan is to roll this out at the beginning of 2021, is that correct?
Yes.
So in the next 6 weeks, 7 weeks, somewhere around there?
Correct.
Okay.
Charisse.
So how are you going to determine where you're going to be putting officers to, patrol particular bad accident-prone places?
So what I can do is I take all of the accidents that we have in the city and I plot them on the map. And so similarly to that heat map that we did before, I can do that with accidents. And then I can do that again with personal injury accidents. And then I can flag just little street segments that have a high, when we did this, I did an example map and I've got like 15 segments that have 70% of all of our accidents. Because it's on highly trafficked areas, it's on, 5 points and, some of the ones that you would expect. And so those will be the stop zones then that officers will be able to run traffic or make stops in those zones.
Well, and I ask because I know as it was sometime last year when I was having an issue watching people just basically run the stop signs at Kohler and Fairview and Linview and Fairview. I mean, people just wouldn't even hardly stop. And myself, because it seems to be like a low-lit area, and I had talked to Brian about this. It's like I would drive in that area to take my mom to get her hair done and to go get her meds. And it seemed like every time, it wasn't a route that I took frequently, but practically it seemed every time there, I would witness someone running the stop signs there. And so I believe Bryant did put someone there just to slow that down. And there's been a couple of times in the dark where I've almost hit people because they just walk, and I don't see them and it's come very close to that kind of issue. So if a citizen calls and says, for example, like I did, and says, we're having problems with people running these stop signs, would that be also a reason for you to specify where police will be located?
The short answer is no.
Okay.
That's the short answer, because that's what we're trying to control for. So we've had some of these internal discussions, and we've already warned the mayor that, because Charisse, it's not just you, but I've gotten emails from others on the council who have said, hey, or citizens who said, hey, I've got something that, can you help
Well, I
me?
did it because so many people came to me and said, you know what? Nobody's stopping it. It wasn't just me, but it's like, yeah, I've noticed
Sure.
that. So that's why
I think some of this speaks to, we've talked about different ways that we might have to be a little more creative and be smarter about how we do certain things. So whether there are something, even like if we think maybe perhaps people aren't seeing it, or there's a lighting, or is there an environmental factor? Can we bring public works in, or whomever that might be able to say, hey, can you help us with this? There's an issue. The presence of a squad car makes everybody's foot come off the gas pedal. I've been doing this 26 and a half years. My foot comes off the gas pedal to this day. So there's just by presence, we can have an impact. The City of Urbana, the Public Works Department has a speed trailer, and we work with them to try to get it dispatched to certain areas. So if we have a particular issue on, hey, there's speeding in this area, sometimes people don't realize what's happening even. And so we put the speed trailer out, and it might sit there for a week or two. So I think there's some other ways that we can try and address some of these concerns without simply making traffic stops,
right,
and then writing warnings or tickets.
Okay.
Okay, Bill Brown and then Bill Colebrook.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a great discussion. I think especially that last point Sharice made, part of the Vision Zero strategy is the data informed locations of traffic enforcement and things like that. But also part of it is anticipating potential crash locations that you don't really have the data on yet. And you can anticipate those by citizen complaints, close calls, and the type of things that Sharice and the chief were talking about. So I appreciate that a lot, that's being taken into consideration, and there are alternatives to dealing with that, because a little bit of enforcement isn't going to cut it probably. Even, if, for example, speeding on Cottage Grove, you can enforce it for a while, but once you stop enforcing it, it'll start up again. So there really needs to be some strategy there to slow traffic that doesn't involve enforcement. And I'm sure other places are like that too. So I'm encouraged by this whole plan. I think it's the right direction. Hopefully officers can differentiate that type of situational awareness where, somebody may make a minor infraction because they have good visibility and they can see, nobody's coming, versus somebody just blowing through a stop sign without even making an attempt to slow or something. And maybe one example you could give them is, if you're riding your bike, you kind of do that anyway, and hope you don't get the ticket, because, it's a lot more effort to stop and start on a bike than it is in a car. So you tend to slow, and if you have good vision in all directions, you just go on through. And in Urbana, half the time, the people at the stop signs, even if they're waiting there and you're waiting for them to go, they'll wave you on through anyway. But I think just kind of common sense approach, hopefully people will get it. But I definitely think this is the right direction and should help alleviate some of the disparity.
Bill, I think you're right. I think the stop signs is a if you ever need something to do, somebody to go watch a stop sign for a while. Very rarely is there a complete cessation of movement at a stop sign. So back 20 years ago, if I was running traffic, you could really watch a stop sign and you'd get sort of a flavor of, okay, what is exactly, at what point am I going to stop somebody? It's just similar to like speeding tickets. We don't want the officer stopping and writing tickets for 33 and a 30. And so, a similar sort of analysis applies with the stop sign even. So yes, I understand.
So Bill Colebrook, you had a question.
Yes, this is for Melissa. You plot a lot of data. Do you also plot driving under the influence of alcohol and driving under the influence of drugs for the city? You'd mentioned crash data. There could be maybe a low frequency of property damage crashes in a certain area of the city, but of those crashes, there may be a high percentage of some sort of impairment, which would obviously drive enforcement as well.
So it's lower than you would expect DUIs, so DUIs resulting from a traffic stop where somebody is moving and we stop them for an infraction. And all of last year there were 21. However, the DUIs is higher than that because we get calls often from like somebody's passed out at the behind the wheel and Steak and Shake drive-through and some of those things. So yes, it's plottable, but it's a small number.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jared.
So I've got a couple of different questions, Chief. The first one that I've got is about the pilot program. And we often say pilot for two reasons. One, because we don't know what we're going to do with it. We're testing something out, and we don't know exactly how it's going to turn into a real program. So I take it this is kind of a test for a more formal policy that will become a part of traffic enforcement itself.
Yes, we are using our best guesses based on Melissa's data and what has happened over the course of the years to sort of say, we believe this is going to be effective. We may have to tweak some things. We may want to add some other things. So at this point, that's sort of why I wanted to say, hey, it's a pilot. It's brand new. Let's see how this goes, and then we can adjust along the way.
So that being said, what portion in the pilot phase do you perceive that this program will take up of traffic enforcement duties that officers have while on patrol?
I'm sorry, could you ask your question again, please, Jared?
The pilot program, if I have 12 to 12 on Tuesday, or 6 to 6 or whatever my shift happens to be, and I'm on patrol in the car from for 8 hours of that shift I'm scheduled to be on. What percentage of a given amount of time that I'm going to be out rolling am I participating in this pilot program? Does that make more sense that way?
Yes, I think you understand. We're not dictating any sort of percentage. I will tell you there are times when the officers, especially in the hot months of summer, are going call to call and are rather busy, and they won't have time for traffic. This is for when they have downtime and have elected to say, listen, I've got time. I've caught up on my open cases. I've got all this done. Now I'm going to go back up into this particular area and work at 5 points because I've already worked 3 crashes there this month and I'm tired of it or whatnot. So we're going to give them the zones to work in, but we don't dictate you have to spend 10% of your shift or whatnot, because there are times when that's effective and then there are times when that's they just couldn't hit a particular mark.
So another way to say it would be then if you're, and I know that, being out and rolling around is kind of the last thing you do. You get a ton of other things probably to do. You're responding to calls, you're doing paperwork, et cetera, et cetera. Just being out and rolling on the streets is, like you said, the lower priority of those things. So another way to say it would be if they are out rolling, pursuing traffic enforcement, is this going to be the only kind of traffic enforcement that they will essentially be participating in?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, the answer is yes. This is where if they're doing traffic enforcement in these zones, this is where they will do it. In the zones identified by Melissa.
Gotcha. And the reason I'm asking that is because I don't know if you saw, did you read Durrell's letter that he sent, I think last night before the meeting?
I got it today and gave it to Melissa later today even. So I did see his, correct, yes.
Okay, so I'm asking that because he brought up something that isn't addressed in, it's not specifically addressed in the memo and in this concept, and that was pretextual stops or investigatory stops. and how those play into this model. Before I ask the questions that he asked in there, how do you have a feeling for how those are going to play into this model?
So I'll speak to a couple of different things here. Number one, if we, however maybe wonky the motivation data is, as was pointed out earlier, still 85% of the traffic stops are conducted are for traffic safety type issues. Relatedly, with regards to the pretextual stops, so some of the discussion that we're having is somebody might say, well, I'm going to stop a car for no plate light because I suspect they might be involved in narcotics activity. Okay. And so, well, what we want to do is, no, we want the officers to stop them for narcotics activity. If I do this, and we develop probable cause or reasonable suspicion, which is a lesser standard, you can make a temporary detention to do that. And that is a violation of the criminal code. Okay. So somebody robs the bank and the red Mustang is speeding through town, we can stop that car, but it's not stopped for a traffic violation. It's stopped for robbing the bank, even though it's on the highway or on the city streets with the lights flashing. And so the idea is we would like, and again, this I think has some of the details that we want to try to hammer out a little bit better. But the idea is if you're stopping someone for a criminal violation, then stop them for the criminal violation, as opposed to some sort of pretext.
And stopping for a criminal violation would be of at least a moderate, the reasonable suspicion or the probable cause reason would have to be evidence in order for that stop to take place.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And I know that we're talking about, enumerating some of this stuff into something, this is kind of like a broad scope, and we're going to have something more specific, I'm assuming we're going to see before this program rolls out. Is that your impression?
With regards to the specificity, I don't think that I'd gotten far enough along to determine whether or not what was going to go before the council. We discussed even like an FAQs kind of thing, that even with the officers, hey, this is what we are planning. So I hadn't gotten that far yet.
Okay. Well, I know we don't have it now. I'm saying, are we going to see it again? Can we see it again before it goes live, if you will?
So I guess I guess we'll have to have a discussion with the mayor, and we'll figure that out. I don't know that I know the answer for that right now, Jared, with regards to the specifics. I don't think it would be an issue, but we're going to I got to get it together. So I'm not opposed to it.
Okay. I just think it would be, obviously it's going to be important for the officers to understand what we've just discussed, and, needing to have that reasonable suspicion and probable cause for stopping vehicles and not using a minor traffic violation as a pretext to search for further crimes. So that was one of the things Darrell had brought up in his letter. And the other one that he had brought up was how, we have that small percentage, but it still exists of traffic stops that turn into something more than that. And he had asked, and I'm not sure that I've seen it, perhaps it's there, perhaps it is not, the policy on searches of vehicles when people are stopped. Do we have policy on the UPD page about what citizens can and cannot do when they're stopped and a search has been requested of them, but not if an officer hasn't met the profile of is it reasonable suspicion to search a vehicle? What's the bar they have to meet?
So there's always probable cause unless that's like weapons, and then it's reasonable suspicion. So, but
okay. So it's probable cause is the line at which an officer stops me and says, Mr. Miller, I have probable cause to believe you have X in your car, which is illegal. I'm going to search your vehicle. Would you please exit the vehicle?
I'm sorry, was that a question or a
statement? Yes. That probable cause is what I need as an officer to tell a citizen, you need to exit the vehicle because I'm going to search your vehicle now.
Yes.
You don't have a choice. I'm doing this.
So, yes, that is one way. There are also other avenues, I suppose. That's where consent search comes in as well.
Okay. Well, and that's what Durrell had brought up in his is, what is the difference? Do we have it clearly delineated to citizens what their rights are, either through policy, or do officers communicate that to citizens as, I'm asking to you,
sure,
citizen, to consent to a search. You do not have to agree to do this. And that's a different situation than when an officer has a probable cause to do so and they don't need permission to do so. They can do so by right.
So yes, that's correct. So when officer, listen, we've got this, that, or the other. Here's what I'm asking tonight, and people do say no. So
So do we have a specific policy on consent search?
There is a policy on searching. I couldn't tell you exactly right now what the exact details were with regards to consent, or what the exact verbiage is in it right now.
Okay. Well, I'm just bringing it to mind because when we're thinking, you made a large point of, one of the biggest ways that the UPD interacts with citizens is through traffic stops. It is the biggest way, right? That we have contacts between officers currently and citizens.
I don't, Melissa might know that off the top of her head, but you're right. It is one of the biggest ways and that we interact. Yes, sir.
So, we're talking about community police relations and things we can do to improve that. And as we're thinking about, what we can do specifically, this is a holistic, I think it's more holistic than even it's described in the memo in trying out this pilot program. So, I'm just trying to go into some of the things that happen in that, which Durrell had brought up in his letter. And, if we're looking for a positive way to do that, being as informative as possible about a consent search might be a really good policy to enact, to enumerate, to put on, when we're looking at our policies and how we rewrite them. An officer being very upfront, being very, straightforward to citizens, saying, I'm asking you to consent to a search. You do not need to consent to this search. Here are your options at this time. Here's what I can do if you say no. And just explaining that to people, I think, would go a long way so that they don't feel intimidated. They don't feel fearful of the interaction.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think one of the things that I preach here is education in all different ways. Hey, we stopped you today because of this, outside of even traffic stops. Hey, I'm here knocking on your door today because we got a complaint about noise, the dog barking, whatever it is. The more education, the more information we can provide the citizens, not always, but generally speaking, the more cooperation and compliance we get.
We are approaching 10:30. You may want to extend the meeting if you want to have further dialogue, or if we feel like we've covered the topic pretty well this evening and want to bring the discussion to a close. It could be a good time to find out.
That was the extent of my comments. I had just about gotten through it, so if there are others, then we'll need to extend. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, so it was pretty excellent discussion, totally, really. Yeah, Diane Marlin.
I'm happy to bring this to a close. I would encourage the public to read Chief Seraphin's memo. It's brief, but it is going to be a radically different approach to traffic stops. And we've talked a lot about addressing systemic racism in our communities. And what we've seen in traffic stops and looking at them through a different lens is that our system of making stops was itself racially biased because it was based on location of stops and largely linked to areas where there were high calls of service. So if you're going to change systemic racism, you change the system, you change what you're doing. And that's what this proposal is. It also shifts the focus from questioning individual officers' motivation, and that's where a lot of the focus was, is why are these stops being made? You know, what's the reasoning behind it? To the true, much of the true reasoning behind the disparity ratio, and that is the location of the stops itself. So this is an example of really getting at the system that's creating the racial disparity, and that's why I'm confident this is going to make an enormous difference in these numbers. So I also want to acknowledge that this was officer driven, it was officer generated, and I want to thank, we didn't actually mention the officers involved who worked on this plan, and I think they deserve credit for doing this.
Okay, I guess that's my cue.
And you have 3 minutes to do that.
I'll be fast. Deputy Chief Searles was involved in this, as was I was, and Melissa. But we had Officer Sarah Links, Sergeant Corey Coker, Detective Rich Coleman, and Officer Seth King. So this was this small group that kind of had multiple meetings, and I don't know if we ever met for fewer than 2 hours. So,
you know,
thank you to them.
They put a lot of thought into this, a lot of work, and then it is going to it's going to make a difference. I'm really confident. Thank you.
I think on that high note, we can thank everybody for participating. Good discussions tonight. And with that, I'll call this meeting adjourned.